can now be streaming live. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rob Painter. I'm privileged to be the chair of the SD61 Operations Policy Planning Committee, and welcome to our June meeting. I'd like to commence the meeting with an acknowledgement of our traditional territories. The Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. And I'd like to request a motion to approve the agenda. Trustee Kwan, any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is unanimous. Moving on to approval of the minutes. Requesting a motion that the May 8th, 2023 Operations Policy and Planning Committee meeting minutes be approved. Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Any comments, observations? Okay, I'll request one, and it's down in the weeds again, but can we ensure that Trustee Duncan has identified not as Education Directions Committee member, but as the board chair in her ex officio capacity? Just to keep things straight all around. Any other comments, observations? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the May 8th, 2023 Operations Policy and Planning Committee meeting minutes? See 1, 2, 3, and that is unanimous again. Any business arising from the minutes? Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one item of business arising at our May Ops. We saw a draft climate action accountability report, and I'm just wanting to check in to see when the final version will be reviewed by the board.
Is there anyone in a position to respond to that? Superintendent.
Thank you. Through the chair, I believe it will come to the June board meeting.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Anything else? Seeing nothing further, I'd like to move on to presentations to the committee, and today we have Scent Aware, Cindy Rompf. And are you in your GVTA capacity here?
Well, as
you have to be, just curious.
Well, I'm here as the co-chair of DOSH. Well, I'm taking the GVTA hat off. Well, I guess it's both, really. Because, yeah, I am the GVTA rep on DOSH. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, please proceed. As per normal, you have 5 minutes.
So, good evening. My name is Cindy Rompf, and I'm speaking tonight as the co-chair of the District Occupational Health and Safety Committee of our school district. Exposure to scented products can adversely affect health. People with asthma, allergies, and respiratory conditions report that exposure to scented products, even in small amounts, can trigger a response. Reported symptoms can include headaches, migraines, nausea, dizziness, lightheadedness, fatigue, weakness, numbness, skin irritation. The severity of these symptoms can vary from mild irritation to incapacitation. Consequently, those people may experience feelings of depression or anxiety. According to the Canadian Centre of Occupational Health and Safety, there are laws in Canada that cover environmental sensitivities. Accommodation is required under the federal and provincial human rights acts. Their reaction is a medical condition. It is a recognized disability. People with allergies or environmental sensitivity are entitled to protection from its cause. Currently, it is left up to individual schools as to whether the school has a scent-free or scent-aware policy and procedure. Many schools have already adopted this scent-free, scent-aware policies on their own, which I think is great. And some examples are Cedar Hill, Doncaster, Eagleview, Tillicum, and Lake Hill. Not only do we have students who are scent sensitive, but there have been a number of scent sensitive TTOCs reporting that they accept callouts to schools, which indicate that they are scent-free. Typically, this is said in the message on ADS. However, the TTOCs run into all sorts of scented products once they arrive at the school. Lotions, bathroom or body sprays, colognes, etc. They feel quite ill or endure headaches and sometimes have to leave early. Currently, scent-free policies are school-based only, and it seems like it's only enforced when a particular staff member is the scent-sensitive person, and even then, some schools might have a scent-free bathroom for that person. TTOCs are left guessing where the safe zones would be and can't rely on those ADS messages to be accurate. Spare board EAs, facility staff, contractors, volunteers also have experienced similar issues. As Director Vare has written in his memo regarding the scent-sensitive workplace policy, it is the policy of Greater Victoria School District to provide a safe and healthy work environment for all employees, students, volunteers, contractors, and others who regularly carry out activities within GVSD work sites. This includes all buildings and schools owned or leased by GVSD. This will be accomplished by eliminating or minimizing as much as possible the use of products and fragrances whose scent or other properties are known to trigger allergic or other hazardous reactions. The need for this policy was initiated by District Occupational Health and Safety Committee, DOSH. Director Vare has worked on creating the scent-sensitive workplace policy, of which you should have a copy of. The committee has reviewed the draft of this policy and strongly supports it. Thank you for your time. Does anybody have any questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, within my time, yay.
You are, in fact. Let's hope that's a good omen for the rest of the meeting. Thank you very much, Cindy.
You're welcome.
We'll move on to C, Superintendent's Report, and start off with Director of Human Resource Services, Vare, with Regulation 4300 from the District Operational Health and Safety Committee.
Thank you, Chair Painter. Just a very brief report tonight. It's simply provided for the information of the committee. It is to advise the committee that we are going to update Regulation 4300. Regulation 4300 is the regulation along with Policy 4300 that establishes the District Occupational Health and Safety Committee. The DOSH, as it's referred to, is not a committee of legislation. It's a committee of board policy. As the regulation and as that policy 4300 indicates, the JOSHs, the schools health and safety committee at each school, in fact, is the legislated and mandated committee under the legislation. So on top of that, the board, through board policy, quite a number of years, so in fact a number of decades ago, established the DOSH, and we recently looked at the composition of the DOSH committee. It came in part out of an impetus from the DOSH itself that raised concerns about not having a representative of inclusive education on the committee, given that a number of concerns with respect to occupational violence relate to students that are supported by the Inclusive Education Department. So in the process of looking at that request, I looked at the committee composition as a whole. Traditionally, joint committees within the board have 50% employee representatives, union representatives, and 50% employer management representatives. This committee, through its regulation, in fact, had only 20% management representative and 80% committee union representative, employee representatives. So we looked at how we might supplement that, and the decision was made to augment the number of management representatives on the committee and hopefully make the committee even more productive than it is currently by bringing in some representation, not only from inclusive education, but include representation from human resources and health and safety, representation from facility services, because a number of the issues we deal with are facilities, and representation from each of the elementary, middle, and secondary schools, plus a district principal or vice principal, to expand that committee, engage in dialogue, and quite frankly, in my opinion, do some problem solving at the committee level, as opposed to having to send stuff off to those various groups, get their opinion, then come back. We are going to be able to make decisions quickly. So I advise the DOSH, they had made the recommendation to add the inclusive learning rep. I advised the DOSH that I would accept that recommendation and would bring to board the further changes to the committee to expand its representation. So there will now be 8 management representatives and 8 employee representatives on the DOSH committee. And the changes to the regulation are outlined in the first attachment to the report, and then the regulation as it would read with those changes is the second attachment to the board report. So happy to answer any questions. There is no motion. It's simply provided for the information of trustees.
Comments? Trustee Duncan. Oh, wait, I'll just hold you for a sec and ask our partner, Cindy Romp, to have her opportunity.
Okay. To be honest, the appearance of this regulation in the ops agenda was a bit of a shock. And to be clear, the change in composition being presented from the employer is not from the DOSH committee itself. We wanted to include the inclusive team because of incidents that were happening in our districts, to try to work on that. And I remember Director Vare brought up the idea through a conversation in our February DOSH meeting, but it wasn't an item on our agenda and it wasn't discussed further or in any detail. So for me, there has been no consultation or discussion or transparency with the DOSH committee itself regarding these changes in composition. I understand where this is coming from, however, and I'm not opposed to reviewing our practices and reviewing the committee's effectiveness. I'm not opposed to change if there is a benefit, but our committee at the moment, those who have signed the terms of agreement, we have been working transparently, openly. There has been great communication. I feel like we are working cooperatively very much as a team. And it would just be nice to have our committee discuss these proposed changes first. That's all.
Chair Painter, if I can respond to that. The committee gave me a written proposal back in January. On February 5th of 2023, I wrote the co-chair of the committee, copied all of the committee members, and provided them with both my response to their recommendation, but also clearly indicated in a 5-page letter what my proposal would be with respect to the composition of the committee. So the committee has known since February 5th what my suggestions and recommendations would be, and that includes listing exactly as I have here the composition of the committee. I reviewed that with them at the February meeting, and it also came up in subsequent meetings. So I'm a bit surprised that the committee, if they had any feedback, didn't give me feedback, given that they have a February 5th 5-page letter.
Well, actually, I'm going to go to Trustee Duncan and then back to Cindy after that.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to confirm my understanding then from the memo is that there is no need to update the policy, that the changes that are being recommended here can be effected simply by updating the regulation? Just wanted to confirm that.
Yes, policy 4300 doesn't specify the composition of the committee. It just simply sets up the committee, Chair Duncan, and then the regulation sets out the membership of the committee.
Thanks for the confirmation. Appreciate it.
And Cindy, I got to say, I'm trying to be all formal and calling everyone director and trustee, and then I say, Cindy, how would you like me to address you?
Cindy is fine.
Okay.
Fine. Thanks.
If that ever changes, let me know. So
Okay.
Cindy, it's your chance.
Well, thank you for the information, Director Vare. So I'll put it on the DOSH agenda for Wednesday for us to talk about it.
Any further comments, questions? QP 947 representative, President Massey. How's that?
And Jane is just fine too.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm just going to say I will echo what Cindy said, and I'm not our representative on the DOSH committee. We have a couple of other members on our executive that are, and the one I'm speaking to today, they weren't aware that the changes were going to come forth in the same manner. And while I can see some of the reasonings behind it, because most of the committees I sit on are equally balanced as well. And, those are kind of things that can be addressed within, terms of reference when you relook at them again for the coming up school year. I'm sure that it'll be a good discussion at your meeting when you have it on Wednesday. So I just wanted to reiterate that was my conversation today with our members. So not sure what got missed there, but something may have. So thank you.
Anything further? And looking for feedback from my colleagues here. One thought I had is that within our oversight responsibilities, I was thinking it might be beneficial to have the reports from the DOSH come to the board on a regular basis, just so that we can remain apprised of the of what issues are ongoing in the district. Any thoughts about that? Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, certainly it was my hope that the annual report provided would start to go into greater depth about some of the the trends, if you will, and to allow the board to have some level of understanding and frankly oversight around where we're seeing health and safety issues manifesting themselves in some kind of a systemic way, where there's a need for policy change or a change in resource allocation or the like, that we start to engage with that. What reporting looks like moving forward beyond the annual report, I think is a good conversation for us to have. Clearly, like when you read the policy around the work of this group, the intention is very clearly to identify issues and in order to make the employer aware of them and to give the employer an opportunity to put in place reasonable, mitigations. And of course, the board is the employer at the end of the day. So I think it's just really a matter of sort of at what level of detail would work for the board and make sense from an operational perspective, given some of the other strains I know and pressures within human resources. So I would be interested to hear what Director Vare or the superintendent thinks reporting could look like moving forward.
Would either the superintendent or Director Vare care to offer any comments? Not required, but just the opportunity there.
Certainly with respect to the annual report, we always review what details are included or not included. And I think I got some feedback from the board when we brought the annual report to the board last October. So that can be incorporated some of that feedback can be incorporated in the annual report. I guess it depends on what the board is looking for on a more regular report from the DOSH committee. It won't impact me, given that I won't be the one preparing it. However, I can tell you that adding another report to the director of HR's position, the director of HR currently, I've been making at least 2 or 3 reports per month to the board. That is certainly at the higher level than I would expect. So to add yet another report to board every month or two only adds to that workload. And I'd certainly my successor will want to know, have some sense of what the board is looking for in those reports if she or he is going to add those to their agenda.
Thank you, Director. That's helpful. In my mind, my thought was not to go and create an administrative burden by asking for additional reports, simply forwarding the meeting minutes, and the board can address issues as issues require. Trustee Duncan, did you have further observation?
Only just briefly that I'm optimistic that annual report will develop and grow in terms of the trend analysis that it offers the board. But obviously it's relatively new and it's sort of developing over time. So, and in the context of these other competing priorities and burdens. That was it. Thanks.
Thank you. Just Director Bear, at this point, just to ensure that we're on the same page, is it the intention of the district to move forward with the regulation change, or is this going to be addressed in any? I understand there's a meeting coming up on Wednesday, so just to clarify.
No, we're providing the report tonight for information, as is the bylaw, the policy. The policy on policies requires, so it's simply provided for your information, and then would be implemented for September.
Okay, well, look forward to seeing how that works, and hopefully very opportunity for additional productive conversations going forward. So we're moving on to policy or C2, new policy, sensitive workplace. Director Bear, over to you again.
Yeah, I'm not, thank you, Chair Painter. I'm not going to go through the entire report. Cindy has highlighted portions of it in her comment, but what this report does and what this draft policy does is provide a consistent and sensitive workplace policy that would apply to all board locations, board offices, facilities, the quadra warehouse, all of our schools, and any other site that the board uses. And what this is an attempt to do is provide some consistency beyond the individual school policies that we currently have in place. The policy, it provides the rationale, which I won't repeat because it's included in the report, and Cindy referred to it as well. It provides a couple of definitions, and then the policy is set out in section 3 of the policy, in sections 3.1 to 3.6 of the policy. It talks a bit about in 3.1 the concerns that arise and the potential impact it has on individuals. And 3.2, it provides that staff, students, parents, visitors will refrain from a few things: wearing personal products that have fragrances that can trigger an adverse reaction. And it gives some examples of those types of products. It also identifies environmental products that may create a reaction, and those include diffusers, deodorizers, essential oils, soaps with fragrance, those types of things. And then even notes that there are certain flowers that we don't want within our schools, given those are a high propensity to have a high fragrance level, which creates a reaction potentially with those that are scent sensitive. 3.3 talks about how we would disseminate the information. So by posting it on the wall, on the board website, by sharing it with parents and students before the start of each school year, by identifying that we have a scent-sensitive workplace policy on postings, doing it as part of the orientation, doing all of those types of things, and notes that it's the responsibility of everyone to administer it, but in a respectful way. And then 3.4 and 3.5 deal with cleaning products and deal with other scented products that maintenance staff may use. 3.6 does note that the policy doesn't apply to scents, smells, or odors that result from or are associated with culturally responsive activities or ceremonies. So that could be, for example, scents that arise during a smudging ceremony. It could be scents that arise if there's incense used as a part of a ceremony within a particular religion. So those types of things. So they're provided as an exception to the policy. And then 4 identifies the responsibilities of it. So principals, managers, and supervisors to try and make sure that people are aware and that it's implemented in a fair way. And the provisions of the Workers' Compensation Act and the BC Human Rights Code are referenced as well in Section 4. And then for the benefit of additional information for those that want it, we reference the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety link in Section 5 of the report to give it an example. So it's here for your review and with a recommended motion that it be referred to the board to review and then provide direction to the policy subcommittee on next steps. Happy to answer questions on it.
Thank you, Director Bear. Questions, comments, anyone? BC PAC President Humphreys.
You can call me Tracy as well. It's always fine.
I like calling you Tracy, but
It's totally fine. Yes, thank you for this. And I just, there were a few questions that I had, and so happy to have the opportunity. So I'll go the last one first, actually, because you just talked about the culturally sensitive piece, which is important. But general conflict around the needs of other protected classes should probably also be included, because there are other potential issues with, for example, chemicals used for the physical support needs of a student with disabilities, or something around, service dog policy, that just things that just pop into my head. So I'm not a policy person. I don't know how to word it, but something that sort of covered all of that, all protected classes and the conflict of needs would be helpful, I think, in a policy. Maybe it should be addressed in the regulation part. I have no idea. So I'm just putting that out there. And then this, I think, probably is more a regulation piece if you have one, but there's no instruction on how to prevent the issues of people coming with scents on them. So I don't know where that gets addressed, but, I'm just thinking about parents who are not going to have a clue that this policy exists, and they're going to send their kid with, detangler spray with a really strong scent or something like that. You know what I mean? So how do we make sure that it's really clear and prevent that from happening? So those are really my questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, just speaking to the question of what further policy development we want to see, or what further consultation we want to see. My suggestion would be that we send it out for electronically to rights holders and stakeholders and ask for comment. I think there's bound to be some aspects of the policy that we just haven't thought about, or that other folks will have a slightly different perspective on. Maybe provide a timeline so that we don't see an inordinate delay in moving this forward at the board level, but at the same time provide an opportunity for folks to consider and feedback.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. And I do note that the recommended motion that I haven't presented just yet does refer to providing direction to the policy subcommittee on consultation. So the expectation is that it will go out. The one that occurs to me is that while we definitely need to accommodate sense associated with cultural practices, I think there probably still needs to be some mechanism providing advance notice, to ensure that anyone who may have particular sensitivities is aware ahead of time that this is occurring. Always in the weeds with me, sorry. Any further questions, comments? So the recommended motion, Trustee Gagnon, beat the buzzer.
Just the buzzer beater. Thank you, Chair. I tend to agree that I think one of the concerns I would have would be making sure that people are aware, and that has to do both with ceremonies such as smudging, as well as for people not overly familiar with the school environment coming in for the first time, or coming in for the first time in a long time, not knowing and unintentionally causing harm. So if we have a way of putting signage near the doors, but also, as was mentioned, having that dissemination of information so that people can get that information early and possibly often to really ensure that the most people possible know before they approach a school that this is what is the environment they are entering. It's the right thing to do. It's also the nice thing to do. So I would like to see that in any way, shape, or form. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you. And conveniently, the members of the policy subcommittee are here tonight and hopefully are taking notes. So any further comments or observations? Okay, with that in mind, the recommended motion tonight is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, review the draft policy sensitivity workplace and provide direction to the policy subcommittee on consultation and further development in compliance with bylaw 9210, development of policy. Is anyone prepared to move that motion? Trustee Kwan, thank you for volunteering. And Trustee Kwan, do you have comments as well?
I actually have an amendment to put forward.
Okay.
I actually think that how I would like to read is really just the change on one word, and that would be the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, review the draft policy sensitive workplace and provide direction to the policy subcommittee for consultation and further development in compliance with bylaw 9210, the development of policy. And the reason for that would be, it sounds like we have to provide direction to the policy subcommittee on how consultation and further development will go, but I believe that should be taken on by the policy committee. So just that one word, instead of on before consultation, before.
Thank you. Comments? Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, so strictly speaking, in the bylaw, it is the board that can, give direction to whomever it is that is in charge of the development of a policy. So sometimes it's not always the policy committee. It might be like an ad hoc committee established by the board or another mechanism established by the board for the development of policy. And so so this, I believe, is a positive request saying, look, board, please advise how you wish this policy to be further developed, including how, if at all, you want consultation to be carried out in relation to the policy development process. So, so yes, I'm certainly hoping that if the policy committee is going to take up this policy and move it forward, that the board seek to direct us on what kind of consultation it would like to see or thinks is appropriate in the case of this particular policy.
Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, I definitely don't disagree with that. I think what I'm trying to get to here is rather than if we want to provide direction on consultation and further development, we probably need to put that in the motion. So we either have to do that, or we provide direction for the policy committee to do further consultation and further development of compliance. So, either way, I guess I'm suggesting we either leave it open to the policy subcommittee, or we just need to provide further direction rather than just saying consultation and further development. Yeah. And further, having said that, I don't have any amendment for what that, I mean, we definitely could add consultation with stakeholders and rights holders. As far as further development, I would look to my fellow colleagues to help with that, what kind of further development they might like to see. But I think we need consultation with rights holders and stakeholders in there.
Sorry, I'm just taking a minute to look at bylaw to see if we actually have something in there. I thought we had some specific direction already. Trustee Duncan, I kind of knew even without looking that you would have your hand up because you know this stuff.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest that, I think in terms of direction, I think it's a well articulated policy. I feel like we're at the point now where we should consult and then, review what kind of feedback we get through that consultation, and then continue our policy development based on that feedback. It certainly doesn't seem like a policy that requires the policy committee to further consider it before it can go for consultation. So that would be my suggestion, is that we send it out for consultation and then review the feedback and then further revise as necessary.
So if I understand, then that might amend this to Board of Education, refer the policy to stakeholders and rights holders for consideration and further development. Is that what you're getting at? That we bypass reference to the policy subcommittee at this point in time?
Yeah, so I guess it could read that the Board of Education review the draft policy, or maybe direct that the draft policy sensitive workplace be sent out to rights holders and stakeholders, I think really for feedback prior to further development in compliance with bylaw 9210.
Superintendent.
All right, thank you, Chair. Just wondering if further to that we can seek clarity on, I understand send it out to rights holders and stakeholders for feedback, but just as we look at the timing, as Chair Duncan had spoken about timing moving forward. So what's a reasonable amount of time that we require in order to ensure that fulsome consultation occurs? And then for it to come back, is it coming back to ops or is it coming back to the policy subcommittee? So just, it's helpful for me anyways, just to understand the scope of the motion.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, my intention anyways of suggesting this is really so that the feedback would come back to ops for consideration. And then the standing committee can make further recommendations to the board about whether, where to go from there based on what feedback's received. In terms of timelines, I think that's such an important question. And I think I would defer to the superintendent around what's feasible given the time of year, but also given the level of priority that we're placing on the development of this policy. I envision sort of sending it out electronically and asking for feedback in writing that way. But there may be some other ideas to improve that so that more folks are able to access the opportunity to provide feedback. Yeah, I think I wanted to keep it high level so that it wasn't prescriptive and to allow our operational leaders to, decide how and when to send it out. But yeah, maybe I guess I'm asking a question back at the superintendent through the chair, what she would advise the board is feasible given the time of year.
Superintendent.
Thank you. From what I know of June and September, I think they're very challenging months to get feedback, and included in that is the summer months. So I would be recommending that at earliest it would come back to the ops October meeting. I also recognize that for VC PAC and PACs, and I don't want to speak for Tracy, but they may be very busy in September organizing PACs. So I'm not sure if October even gives enough time. So I'd lean into her voices, and also our mechanism could be email for sure, but we do have a communication strategy with rights holders that I would want to ensure we do more than email, and that we have their voices heard throughout the policies and regulations.
Would something along the lines of for review not later than November? Is that sort of consistent with your thoughts here?
It certainly works from the operational side. I look to the rights holders and stakeholders to see if that's a timing that aligns. I wouldn't want to speak for them.
Mm-hmm. I got a thumbs up from GVTA. I have a full hand from Tracy.
I just don't know if I'm supposed to speak when you're sort of in the middle of crafting a motion. So, but yeah, no, I totally recognize it is challenging, and actually timing of ops and our meetings is particularly the issue because it's the second Tuesday of every month is our BC PAC meeting, which follows the ops meeting. So we're really, we do have kind of that full month if we get notice of something, and we get the full month, but then we're relying on, parent volunteers and, possibly someone being sick or someone missing a piece. So I'm sure that we could have it on the agenda for September, and I'm sure that we could get communication out beforehand for October for some items, because people are usually paying attention around that time. But I think it's going to depend with each individual piece. And also, not to, again, get into your work, but it depends on when you need it to be active, right?
Mm-hmm. Superintendent, you kind of, I'm thinking it's like that hesitant hand up, like you don't really want to wade into this, but
I think Chair Painter, as you have articulated, no later than November ops. If we have feedback and information, we can provide that in the October ops, but it doesn't go beyond November. So our goal would be to bring it back in October for the ops meeting. But if we feel or people have articulated they haven't been able to provide feedback, then we would extend it to November.
Yes, I thought a little buffer in there might be useful. So if I might suggest, how does this sound? That the Board of Education of School District Number 61, Greater Victoria, refer policy sensitive workplace to rights holders and stakeholders for feedback and return comments and recommendations to or not later than the November 2023 Operations Policy and Planning Committee meeting. Does that cover the bases? I'm getting one thumb. 2 thumbs plus my thumb, that's 3 thumbs. We're good. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for stick handling that. We're on to C3, the policy subcommittee report. And first up is revised policy 1161, freedom of information and protection of privacy. And I'll start this time with the recommended motion that the Board of Education of School District Number 61, Greater Victoria, approve the revised policy 1161, freedom of information and protection of privacy. And Superintendent, are you leading this one, or is it over to Director Canty?
I believe that is Director Canty and Secretary Treasurer Stride.
The Secretary Treasurer. It's good to know things still flow downhill these days. So please take it away.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Chair. This relates to our privacy management program and the implementation of this program. While we were working through the requirements, also required us to update our policies and regulations, administrative regulations that correspond to the policy. We, as you can see from the pack-up, we did already have policy 1161. It was a far briefer reference to the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, and the revised policy is much more verbose and updated according to today's requirements with privacy management program guidelines and regulations. So we're bringing it forward from this went to policy subcommittee and some amendments were made, and now bringing it forward to operations. I won't read through the whole policy, but I'm happy to take questions and feedback. Secretary Treasurer, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think you did a great job. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll open it up for questions, comments. Anyone? Trustee Duncan.
I just wanted to bring us to page 21 of the pack-up, which is the definition section of the revised policy. And right now, the first definition that you see at 2.1 is personal information, and it's defined at a high level. And then there's also, I would suggest that we add maybe at 2 would be at the new 2.2, the definition of personal identity information in Schedule 1 of FIPA. And personal identity information, according to Schedule 1 of FIPA, it means any personal information of a type that is commonly used alone or in combination with other information to identify or purport to identify an individual. I just think it's really important that we acknowledge the complexity, in the modern world when it comes to the definition of personal information, and just add that personal identity information definition there. And then at 2.4, again, in this definition section, so at committee, we spoke briefly about the definition of staff. And so while I appreciate that right at the moment, we're referring to staff and we're including contractors and volunteers under the definition of staff for the purposes of the policy. While I appreciate that the obligations under FIPA, where we have a contractor or a volunteer undertaking activities in the context of board authorized activities, like whether it's under contract to the board to provide services, or whether it's in the context of a volunteer activity, which gives an individual access to personal information. I think it's still very important that we separate out and clarify that although the obligations to adhere to the requirements of FIPA apply to contractors and to volunteers, they are not staff. And the Act does not treat volunteers or contractors as staff, but the Act does, require public bodies like school boards to ensure that all of the activities it carries out, whether through contractors or through volunteers, are done so in compliance with the Act. So I wonder if we can just sort of separate out those contractors and volunteers, even just into a 2 point, I guess that would be like 2.6, and acknowledge that the expectation is that these folks also adhere to all of the relevant school district policies and regulations, and indeed to FIPA.
Yeah, I'm going to throw my 2 bits in here because it's sort of almost on topic, which is unusual for me. But the first observation I had was a 2.1. I had the sense that this reference to business identification or business contact information. The one point that I wanted to raise was the idea that there may be situations where parents are, for example, sending in an email and they're doing it inadvertently from their work contact. In theory, that's their business information, but they're writing in the context of a parent. And so I think that might be helpful to somewhere in there to identify that, parents or caregivers operating in that capacity, that their information is not considered business contact information. And similarly, I had questions just about the implications of FIPA, both the release of information and obligations for maintaining adherence with the direction. Many of our volunteers are going to be active, well-meaning parents. And so if we're going to put expectations upon them, or alternately, their information is somehow going to be available within the context of district operations, then I think some clarity around those issues may be necessary here. And Trustee Duncan, I know you're more familiar with this topic. You might have some thoughts.
No, I just want to say that that's excellent points. And I think if we separate out contractors and volunteers often are parents, from staff in the definition section, I think that will put us in good stead. It'll set us down the right track in terms of how we think about, for instance, business contact information. So business contact information in the context of FIPA would be staff business contact information. It would not be, parent volunteer, business contact information. It would very likely be a contractor's business contact information, right? So making those, differentiating these folks and explaining the scope of what is required is definitely important. I just want to say, I agree. Those are important points that we should consider.
Okay, thank you. Associate Superintendent Arts, were you stretching? I kind of saw a hand in the background, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, good eye. We have a light that goes out motion censored, so I'm responsible. Thanks for catching me.
The mood lighting is important, so
Yeah.
yes,
Correct.
by all means, stretch away. I'll wait for the artificial hand that comes up if necessary. Okay. Other comments? I'll pitch in, but I'm certainly waiting my turn. Trustee Kwan.
Mine is more just you know, trying to keep everything consistent kind of notice. I just noticed that FIPA is used with most things, but there is references to FOIPA in parts of it as well. And I just wondered, is that on purpose or should we be keeping consistent with one acronym?
Through the chair. Thank you. That is oversight. So thank you. We will look for that consistency and make the amendments.
Personally, based on my own my work practices, I'd like to see everything FOIPA, but that's just me. One question I did have was there is reference to student information, and I was wondering if there's been consideration to caregiver information. And I know that in many cases, often they're interchangeable, but I do recognize that, you know, for example, for registration purposes, it's frequently the caregiver's information that is being provided for such purposes. And so I'd like to think that there's a really simple way to address that, perhaps in referring to like an administrative procedure where we're talking about you know, student information is collected for these purposes, student and caregiver information is collected for these purposes, just to be, and I'm not trying to belabor the point. I'm just thinking that if this is going to be the primary reference that people who happily spend their time thinking about other things other than FIPA, that having explicit information about some of these nuances can be helpful. We don't want people guessing about stuff like this. My thought. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, just a couple of other minor amendments. So at 3.1, this is on page 22 of the packet, it talks about the procedures. And I know we spoke briefly about just making sure that administrative regulations is what we use consistently throughout the policy, just to avoid confusion. And then the only other note I would make is under 5, so references. I think it would be helpful to actually reference the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy regulation, which often gets overlooked and is an important document in terms of all this.
Okay, and Director Canty, I apologize. I should have clarified this point at the start. Would you like to discuss the entire package of policy and administrative regulation all together, or would you like to take them separately?
Thank you, Chair. I believe our prioritization was the privacy policy. With the understanding that with the timing of bringing forward the new regulations, administrative regulations, they may require more time.
Mm-hmm.
Secretary Treasurer, is that your understanding, or were we hoping to address the package this evening?
Yeah, I think the priority was the policy, given that we need to be in compliance with legislation. However, if they were well received and clean and no changes, then we would move forward with them as well. But if there's feedback, we can always bring those back at another time.
So, what is the wish of the committee at this point? Shall we focus primarily on the policy at this point in time? A, or B, look at everything? Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, the intention of the committee was to focus on the policy and getting that signed off, given the deadline for compliance is passed. And so that's the priority here. And then that'll also give some more time and scope to further develop the administrative regulations without so much pressure. So yeah, my suggestion, and I think what we agreed as a committee is that we would focus on the policy, getting that sorted out, and then the administrative regulations would be developed. And then, you know, my suggestion would be brought back once there's been some more time to further develop those.
Yeah, I like that approach too. Is that agreeable, Trustee Gagnon, Trustee Kwan? I'm seeing nods and shakes to the affirmative, so let's focus on that. Let's focus on the policy in this case. We do have some suggested changes to those policies. Do we want to refer this back, or do we want to actually address those in the form of motions? Well, Trustee or Director Canty, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I was just going to provide some context around the definitions in the policy, and I think as a guiding principle, we've tried to adhere as closely as possible to the definitions from the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, thinking that we could become more descriptive and give more guidelines in the administrative regulations. And my question to the committee is whether some of the feedback regarding definitions and scope might be more applicable within the accompanying regulations, or whether they would need to be amended in the policy itself.
All right, we're switching screens, so if anyone had their hand up briefly, I missed it. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, my view is that the amendments need to be made to the policy. Undoubtedly, the regulations are going to go into more depth and sort of tease out some of the nuance here. Like, for instance, you know, what the expectation is around contractors as opposed to volunteers, as opposed to staff. But I think it's really important in this policy document to include the personal identity information definition and to, you know, make sure that we've separated out contractors and volunteers, make sure we refer to administrative regulations consistently, FIPA consistently, and then add in the FIPA regulation. So yeah, I mean, I certainly think that these are amendments that need to be made to the policy itself.
Okay, thanks. With that in mind, let's start. So right off the bat, let's go 1.0 rationale. Do we have any suggested amendments within 1.0? Let's take a minute to have a look. Okay, any comments at this point? Any recommendations? Okay, I'm gonna make the gamble that is correct, and I'm gonna move on to 2.0 definitions. And because I know that we've already had some conversation, 2.1 personal information. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, would it be easier if I just moved, add a 2.2? And then I'll just put in the chat what we'd be adding. at 2.2.
Chat, good option.
This should be easier. Yeah. And this is just the definition of personal identity information in Schedule 1 of FIPA.
I just pull back one and just ask for input. Within 2.1, the business contact information. Trustee Duncan, you have any, or Director Canty or anyone else, do you have any thoughts about addressing caregiver information or business contact information within the context of business with contracted business with the district? I'm just trying to differentiate between someone who is doing business with the district and someone whose business information is used to communicate personal matters. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that is the definition of personal information. So I don't think it's really a matter of changing that. So I don't think that would be appropriate, but I do think it's just a matter of under staff. So at 2.4, looking to separate out and maybe creating a 2.5 and 2.6, just separately acknowledging that contractors are expected to adhere to the relevant like to FIPA and to relevant school district policies and regulations when carrying out work on behalf of the school district. And then another line saying volunteers in the context of their volunteer work on behalf of the district are also expected to adhere to FIPA. And then in administrative regulations, it might be like, for instance, the one that might refer to the work of volunteers. There would be an opportunity there to clarify some of the nuance. I don't know if we need to do that in a policy document at this level, but I think separating out those three groups would be appropriate in a policy level document. Would be my advice anyway.
I appreciate that, and I'll get off this one. But my concern about personal information is that there are situations other than in a volunteer role where parent or caregiver's personal information may become their business related information may fall into the well, may be held by the district, and that was the distinction that I would like to make. I don't have a solution for it though, so I'll move on. 2.2 FIPA. Was it your desire to include Trustee Duncan and regulations, or is that, I don't think that's common practice in any of our policies. Do you think it's fine as it is?
Yeah, my suggestion was just to add the regulation under in section 5. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything for reference to 2.3. My apologies. Okay, so you are proposing a 2.2 with a change to the numbering subsequent to that. Personal identity information means any personal information of a type that is commonly used alone or in combination with other information to identify or purport to identify an individual. And I think this is really important, especially considering the moves towards disaggregated data and some of the other initiatives that the province is moving forward with right now. So is it your recommendation that this would be 2.2? Is that what you're moving, Trustee Duncan?
That's correct.
Okay, specific to this matter, any questions or comments? Director Canty.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question regarding, do the definitions in the policy need to refer to content within the policy? So, for example, the other definitions are all expanded on or referenced in the content of the policy statement. And I don't think personal identity information is. So I'm not sure if that matters from a policy point of view.
All right, switch the screens, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, what I would say is that, and this is just my view, but in terms of definitions, when we're talking about a policy where the intention is to put in place a management program to appropriately protect personal information, then I just my thought is that we should be clear that when we're talking about personal information, we're also in the modern world also talking about personal identity information. And so, yeah, so I think so that we're all clear on what we're trying to protect and what that might look like in the context of modern public sector work. I think it should be there, but I of course would defer to the committee for direction.
Yes, thanks for that. And I was actually wondering, because this is something that is being introduced at this point in the conversation, it's not surprising that it's not in the draft policy, but I do see, for example, in 3.1 where it says personal information, I could envisage this being personal information and personal identity information to address both matters, and then to move forward in that manner throughout the remainder of the policy. That would be one proposal. Thoughts, questions, comments? I see that obviously it's going to make more work for the administrative regulations, et cetera, but I do believe that recognizing where we are going as a province with the collection of different forms of personal identity information, I think that could be useful to get that step ahead. The question is, do we need to do it at this instant, or is it sufficient to put this in place and put it on the books for review in September or October, when the remainder of the package will be coming back for review? Okay, I'm going to need input because obviously it's dangerous if I'm starting making up my own ideas. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, I think maybe I would suggest that just we move through the amendments one by one, and then so we don't kind of fall back into considering the regulations, because I think there seemed to be kind of consent of the committee, at least of the voting members, that it would be prudent to have those come back at a later date. So I think the goal is just to make amendments as directed by the committee and to the policy, and see if we can get to the point where the policy can be signed off, just so that we can make sure we're in compliance.
Certainly. Okay. So right now we're looking at the language for a proposed new 2.2. And I've read it out once, but the personal identity information. Any comments, questions about that, or I will call the question. I'm seeing none. All those in favor of including personal identity information as a new 2.2 in definitions? Okay, and that is unanimous. So I will take it as a given that we will be referring to the numbers on the screen as we see them. Don't try to start making up 2.2, 2.3, but go with what we've got, recognizing that those will be amended in the final version. So moving on. So FIPA is good, regulations is good. C. Duncan, you have recommendations on changes to the language. Staff refers to all employees of the school district. Under FIPA, staff also refers to contractors and volunteers.
Yeah, just my suggestion was just to separate those out into separate points. So staff refers to all employees of the school district who are expected to adhere to all relevant school district policies and regulations. And FIPA, and then do the same for contractors, and then another line for volunteers. But the contractors and the volunteers, I think, you know, in describing them, I think we just sort of say when carrying out work on behalf of the district. Right, so that it's clear that, you know, if a volunteer is a parent, we're talking about them as a volunteer carrying out work for the district. We're not talking about the parent in terms of what other personal information might be held by the district. Just so we're clear on context here.
Okay, do you want to take a stab at putting that into the chat so that we have some language? The one thing about I will offer from with respect to contractors, it's not so much an expectation as much as their obligation to conform to district regulations or policy regulations and FIPA should be a condition of the contract that they sign, and that we define that relationship in a formal manner, since they're external to the reporting structure. I'll take a stab at that.
I wonder, Chair, if Director Canty might want to speak to that, because I'm sure that that's something that they're going to be working on behind the scenes in terms of administrative regulations and other changes they might be making.
Through the chair, thank you. With this definition, we were advised alternatively to keep it as one because with the clarification that this is under FIPA, that the volunteers and contractors under the Act are included as the staff requirements. And so I just wanted to be clear, if we're breaking that out, how we're kind of what definition we're using separately for volunteers and for contractors that would be different to the expectations on staff under FIPA. And like I said, it was really a goal to adhere as closely to the existing definitions within the Act.
I'm just taking a minute to get a better understanding of Trustee Duncan's.
Sorry, Chair. Ignore that first one. It was a slip of the finger and I pressed send before I had amended
okay.
it. So just so the second attempt would be my suggestion for how we refer to staff. And then so just speaking to Director Canty's point, so the point is not to separately define or to change anything from a compliance perspective, but to simply acknowledge that volunteers are not staff, but when they're carrying out activities as volunteers on behalf of the district, they have obligations to comply with FIPA, and likewise in the context of a contractor, again, they're not staff, but they do have obligations to comply with FIPA when they're carrying out work or services on behalf of the board or the district. So I think it's just how we get there, rather than sort of any change to how their obligations would be thought of. But again, you know, if I'm at the will of the committee, and if folks don't want to separate those out or don't see the merits in doing that, then fair enough.
Well, it would be, for myself personally, Trustee Duncan, it would be helpful to perhaps see what the other two, what the staff or what the contractor and volunteer would look like, to better understand the distinction.
No problem. Just doing that now.
So Trustee Duncan, just within the chats, I've thrown in an alternate to contractor. My distinction here is that when it comes to staff, employees of the district, there are legal mechanisms to enforce compliance with FIPA, et cetera. And I don't see that those same levers are in place when we're talking about external parties. And as a consequence, we need to define those. In my mind, for contractors, it would be within the terms of their agreements. You know, just the kind of standard boilerplate that we would include in all contracts going forward, as opposed to a blanket. They're obligated because we haven't established that requirement within a contractual agreement. And I know it's getting into the weeds. I'm trying to restrain myself. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you know, it's up to the board about how prescriptive we want to be in a policy. I also tried to stay as high level as possible, recognizing that there, you know, some of this will be, you know, more clearly directed in the regulation, and there'll be other work in terms of sort of reviewing contracts and other procurement practices where there might be things that need to change process-wise. So yeah, I just tried to stay at a high level.
Trustee Kwan.
I wonder if another way to write this without having to add contractors and volunteers, if we just referred to staff, refer staff instead of saying employees, contractors, volunteers, if we just referred to paid and unpaid. I'll leave it there.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, in the interest of kind of just staying at a high level and but I didn't think about that as a possibility. I just sort of worked with the draft we were working with and tried to separate out where I thought it would add or was important to do so. I really didn't think about reworking or the wording at all. I just sort of was working from the draft that was before the committee. So yeah, I don't know if the standing committee wants to consider further tweaking of the wording. I was just trying to keep it as simple as I could in terms of achieving the goal, which in my mind was to separate these groups out rather than referring to them all as staff. But the obligation is the same. It's just really about how you get there.
Mm-hmm. I do like them withdrawing my comment. I do like the idea of including contractors and volunteers separately, simply because I believe that the mechanisms in subsequent regulations and direction for ensuring compliance is going to be different with each group, as will the obligations for the district to provide guidance and training to these parties to ensure compliance. So with this in mind, I'm going to state for the record that there is a motion on the floor to vary or to replace the current 2.4 staff refers to all employees of the school district with the second, removing the second sentence and replacing it with a new 2.5 contractors working on behalf of the school district are required to comply with FIPA and all relevant school district policies and regulations, and a new 2.6, recognizing the number is probably wrong, volunteers carrying out volunteer activities on behalf of the school district are required to comply with FIPA and all relevant school district policies and regulations. So that's the motion on the floor. Any further comments? All those in favor? Okay, that is unanimous. So we're going to move on then. Policy statement 3.0, moving on 3.1. And Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, so this was just, again, a housekeeping matter, just here at 3.1, referring to the procedures. Instead of referring to the procedures, we refer to administrative regulations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And referring back to your earlier suggestion about personal identity information, is there value in here to inserting this in, say, for example, 3.1, to uphold the privacy, confidentiality, appropriate use of personal information and personal identity information? Is there value in that? It then comes back to the question, if we're not going to make any references to it, as Director Canty questioned, is there merit in having the definition? Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, I think it's up to the committee, how it wants to proceed. I tried to refrain from wordsmithing and so just tried to keep it at a high level. So discussion at the committee was like around the definition of personal information was just a point about acknowledging some of the nuance here as it relates to identity information. And I think it's particularly relevant just in the context of education, but in other sectors as well. I think it's enough to acknowledge that we are talking about that, whether we reference it or not in the policy. I think we want to start to almost like socialize folks to understand that nuance. And I think it's important to start to do that in the policy. Again, I try to avoid wordsmithing, but I'm happy to hear other people's views.
Secretary Treasurer, so lovely to see your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd add a little bit of context for this committee because there was quite a bit of discussion that we had at a policy subcommittee on this, taking in all of the additional information. And I just wanted to note that the template for this policy, it's not something that Andy just made up. It was a template that was provided to us through Harris & Co., so through legal counsel, to ensure compliance with the FIPA. So I just wanted to add that in as context for the committee.
Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. Trustee Duncan.
Just thought we could, after we have a finalized version of our own, we could share it back with them.
Okay, good point. Okay. Trying to restrain myself from the weeds and seeing no uptake, I will drop my point. Within section 3, are there any comments, observations, recommended changes? Trustee Duncan.
Are we going to just do a friendly amendment to refer to administrative regulations? Or do we need to move a motion, Chair? At 3.1, it's referring to the procedures rather than to administrative regulations, which is what we mean.
Well, and I think the actual defined term is regulations. So I think we'll just stick with regulations in this case. Is that agreeable to everyone? Director Canty.
I believe the intention was to refer to administrative regulations wherever possible, which I believe we have elsewhere in the documents, but missed this example.
Okay, no, but I note that in the current definitions, regulations means the administrative regulations to this policy. So regulations then becomes the defined term. So if we're going to refer to the administrative regulations here, I mean, perhaps we should get rid of the original regulations means administrative regulations definition. We're not being consistent.
Through the chair, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. So yes, Director Canty, are you comfortable with a friendly amendment to change that to regulations, and we'll move along?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything further in section 3? I see no hands, therefore we will move along. Anything in section 4? Trustee Duncan.
Again, just a housekeeping item at 4.2.3. We're just going to refer to FIPA rather than FOIPA. I think, again, that's just a housekeeping item, hopefully.
Yep. Thank you for that. Nothing further. Oh, sorry, wait. All right, and in 5.0, anything with respect to the references identified? Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, just again, I think probably this could be done by a friendly amendment, subject to staff feedback, but just adding the freedom of information and protection of privacy regulation. That would be like the new 2. Or II.
Right. Is there anything insignificant in referring only to part 3 of FIPA in reference 1? Not as well versed as I should be. Just wondering if there is a specific reason we're referring to that section as opposed to the entire act. Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, my guess is that they were trying to highlight the privacy protections in part 3, but maybe Director Canty knows why they've highlighted part 3 as opposed to everything, but part 3 is protection of privacy, just FYI. Obviously this policy is focused on privacy, but I know
Sure.
we're also acknowledging the access rights as well, which is not just part 3. So that's actually a good catch, but I don't know if we need to we could just delete part 3. I mean, it's complying with that legislation, period, full stop, not just part 3, but everything. So that would be my suggestion, subject to Director Canty's perspective.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, I think it was just an attempt to be specifically compliant. But you're right, as an organization, we need to comply with everything that refers to the work that we do within the Act and the regulation. So I don't see any immediate issue with making the scope broader.
Okay. Thank you for that, Director Canty. Anything further in this section? Okay. So globally, with those amendments, I would like to present the motion that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, approve the revised policy 1161, freedom of information and protection of privacy, as amended. I'm seeing no hands for debate. All those in favor? Okay, unanimous, moving forward. At this point in time, Director Canty, I was going to ask Director Canty, so please jump in.
I should let you finish your.
No, I was just going to ask if we wanted to go through the rest of this or to hold that for another opportunity.
I will defer to the committee for that decision. I think the one request I did want to bring forward to the committee is we were hoping to publish further information regarding our privacy management program on our district website. We have a page of information drafted that we're adding to, and we were hoping, regardless of the state from the end of this meeting of the administrative regulations, to still reference them even if that were in draft. So that's something I just wanted to obviously the privacy policy, we have the amendments just passed that we can I think there was a a slight question around a further reference to council. But beyond that, it sounds like we're in a good place with our privacy policy amendment. And then were we not to pass the administrative regulations this evening, the request from myself would be to still publish and reference those as under review, but visible to the public.
Thank you, Director Canty. Any comments, observations? Secretary Treasurer.
You, Chair. Just wanted to clarify that the administrative regulations don't require to go to the board for approval. However, we discussed in policy subcommittee that members of the committee would like to see them come back after review.
Yeah.
So just adding that. Thanks.
Comments, observations? Okay, I'll go out on them. I'm in favor of Director Canty's motions to publish this information on the web, identify administrative regulations and procedures as under review, and that I'll further recommend that any comments or suggestions can be directed to Director Canty, CC other members of the committee so that we're all in the loop. And I believe we can move forward at this point in time, recognizing that there will be an opportunity to raise this issue. As I understand, there's going to be a fair bit of work yet to do on implementing what is a complex matter. Director Canty.
Thank you, Chair. Just before this goes to committee member comment, I think some of the amendments just made would need to be reflected in the accompanying administrative regulations. So if the Secretary Treasurer and I could commit to ensuring consistency between the amendments just made and the text of whether it's definitions or the text of the regulations or the references as well. And so we would review them with that eye of the amendments just made.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So anything further from the committee? Anything at all? Okay, thank you very much, Director Canty. That took a bit, but it is a complicated matter, and I'm really pleased to see that we are moving forward, that we're going to be in compliance, and that I think there's some really valuable elements within this the policy and supporting guidance material that is going to improve our practices all around. I'll move forward with policy 5150, sanctuary schools, with the recommended motion that the Board of Education School District number 61, Greater Victoria, approve the new policy 5150, sanctuary schools. Who's going to be leading this one, Superintendent? Just looking for who to point to.
Yeah, I can start anyways. Happy to start. So this draft policy has gone out for review, and we have received feedback, and we've embedded the feedback. We did receive feedback on the weekend, and I think what we have here in front of us is the actual policy, and what we would look to do is to create the regulation, which will operationalize the policy. So the majority of the feedback we received on the weekend actually would sit within a regulation. That's my perspective anyways, but other districts have had one document, so they include policy and reg or policy and admin procedure in one document, and we've delineated the two. So we have the policy that has gone for review, and then we would be building out a regulation to supplement and complement this policy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Superintendent. Tracy,
Well, you've all been waiting for my feedback, right? So
eagerly.
So not gonna try and take up too much time, and I apologize for being camera off through that last discussion, but I appreciate the length of it because I needed rest. I'm suffering from like the wildfire smoke, and it's really like an illness. It's quite debilitating, and today's been better, but the last 2 days I couldn't have even talked to you. So with that said, I don't know where we missed it and whether the policy draft came out to us sooner and I just didn't get it. But I actually didn't get the policy draft until I realized I didn't have it, asked for it, and got it very promptly as soon as I asked. So I apologize if it was me that fell down on that, but just, I couldn't send it out till I had it. And that's when I had it. So the feedback that you received was you're probably referring to one from the South Park PAC's anti-racism committee. You may be referring to other things too. I don't know, but we received that and I suggested they send it directly because we don't have, we didn't have the opportunity to have a discussion as VC PAC. But I felt, that they made some important points that to me were just questions. I see where you're saying, Superintendent, that and I thought of the same thing. Maybe some of this belongs in the regulation, and so that's why it's not there. But at the same time, there were definitely questions present in my mind as well about, okay, so what will the process be? Because some of it isn't, again, not great at this policy and regulation stuff, but it didn't seem like either or, it seemed like the process to implement, right? And so I guess for me, the questions they asked, I wouldn't mind hearing answers to if there's an opportunity tonight or in future, because then that can inform future discussions with VCPAC. But I mean, I have to apologize. We just, we don't have any more meetings happening. I've sent it out. That was the only feedback I received. So that's where we're at. It's important from a human rights perspective to VCPAC that this kind of a policy be implemented and that it clearly protect both students and their families. That was one piece that I personally kind of took note of, that it wasn't necessarily clear that that protection would extend to the family. It was really student specific. So that was the only thing I took note of personally. But that's, I appreciate the opportunity to send it out because even though we only heard from one PAC, I think it was really clearly important to that PAC. And they had a lot of thoughtful feedback on it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah. I just obviously we just received the feedback from the South Park Anti-Racism Committee, and really appreciated the thoughtful, kind of well articulated and detailed feedback. I would agree with the superintendent that my sense is that the intention to add more detail about how a sanctuary schools policy will be implemented operationally, that would be for the administrative regulation. But I think because of the importance of this work and because it is new to our district, I think there's some merits in drawing on our bylaw, I think it's 9220 on administrative regulations, where the board can direct that the administrative regulation not only be created, but then brought back before the board for approval. And so I think in this case, given that there are some complexities, that would be I think a sensible or reasonable suggestion, an avenue for further thought and consultation when the administrative regulation draft comes back to committee. So we can sort of just look at it and go, okay, does it check all those boxes? Has it included everything that we should include in light of the feedback that we received?
I think that's useful. Secretary Treasurer, and then Ellen Campbell after that.
Chair, I was just going to let you know that Ellen was wanting to speak, so.
Okay, thank you. Well, without further ado, Ellen, please.
Hi, thank you all so much. Sorry, I've been sort of creeping on these meetings past a little bit. So I'm Ellen Campbell. I am a lawyer and researcher, and I'm coming in the capacity as a member of Radical Action for Migrants with Migrants in Agriculture, ISLA. So we represent migrant workers who are on the southern part of Vancouver Island on Saanich and Lekwungen territories. And so I wanted to come in here just after seeing the policy. We had considerable concerns and were able to review what Jessica Ash from the South Park Anti-Racism Committee submitted, and would like to put our add our support to the concerns, the many concerns that were raised there. I think, you know, given that there's going to be administrative regulations that are going to be looked at for moving forward, I think this is I mean, the having a sanctuary schools policy overall is a really wonderful start. But I think there's places where this policy could be more robust in addressing some of the concerns that Jessica has so eloquently raised, and some of the concerns that are reflected in our original submissions for March 6th on our the way that we had hoped that a policy could look to serve the needs of precarious and undocumented folks within our communities. And so I'm not seeing where it would be out of line with having an administrative regulation to having additional sections in the policy that speak to specific changes to the registration process and decreasing barriers that are currently very very significant in the registration process for School District 61, in particular, the requirement of citizenship for most registrants, and that being the main pathway by which folks register. The second being the importance of a proactive campaign targeted at families with precarious or no immigration status, having that really clear and having multilingual communications to that effect, and also targeted at areas where those families will be able to access those materials and most likely to see them. Third, an appeal system by which folks who are denied are able to access those services. And fourth, a review and evaluation process. So I don't see where a policy that also has regulations couldn't also outline the possibility for having those four key areas. Just noted that, you know, the board will change the registration process. Second, have proactive campaigns around public education materials, have an appeal system, and then review and evaluation process. I really am hopeful that this policy will create a lot of change. We've seen a lot of change happening already within New West and Central Okanagan, having multiple families registering. Unfortunately, those systems have also shown that there are deficiencies to having a sanctuary schools policy that's not robust. And so that means families are relying on groups like us who we work full time, we're doing a lot of other things, having to show up and be the translators and be the people who are advocating for these families within really still racist and entrenched systems that are keeping children out of schools who need to be in schools. So I'm sorry, I apologize for taking up so much time, but it's really something that I think is key and important. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ellen. And it's not taking up our time. It's informing us from, you know, a position that is deeply involved in this matter. So thank you. It's helpful. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, and I would just echo your comments, Chair. Thank you so much for being here and for your ongoing work to support families and ensure that kids get access to education. So, yeah, I'm certainly swayed by your comments. You know, my concern is always ensuring that the policy is appropriately pitched and then letting some of the operational matters be articulated in the regulation. But again, in for us uncharted territory. So, you know, I think I appreciate your points that, you know, in a policy in this area, given that it's new, given that we're changing systems and some cultural changes too in our system, that it would be prudent to make some changes to the policy itself so that the direction of the board is that much clearer or more clear. So thank you. Really, really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Tracy.
I also wanted to thank Ellen for really articulating those issues very, very clearly. Because yeah, it's a challenge for me to do so coming from the hat I'm wearing right now, but it's really important that we understand why it's important that it be in policy in that space. So I appreciate that. And I also wanted to circle back around and not to belabor the point, but we haven't touched on that issue that we are talking about students, but not families. And I'm really, really worried about that because I've actually, like, with my other hat on, have been a part of more than one situation where I went out in support of a family who was, you know, picked up basically right outside of the school grounds. And so that protection is really important to support students.
Mm-hmm. No, that is useful context. And I will throw my 2 bits in. I like seeing things in policy, and everyone has their preferences. I've often felt that what's in a regulation are the elements that either are really detailed or the stuff that are subject to change. Things that are straightforward or are clear expressions of where we want to go, such as registration shall be clear, that, or that there will be an appeal process, or that we will undertake a regular review and evaluation of the effectiveness of this. I see those as all key elements of the policy. I also have to admit that when I read that first sentence of ordinarily resident, and it took me a couple of reads to actually get myself through there because my eyes started to glaze over, and tried to imagine the practicality of that first sentence when the second sentence seems to cover the bases as well. I think there's opportunities recognizing that in some cases, the population that's going to be most interested in this is not necessarily going to have English as a first language. I think it would be really useful for us to be very clear and use regular or more common conversational tone in expressing some of these statements. Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to that, Chair, if I may. So some of the difficulty I know when it comes to defining that term in particular. So there's the term in the School Act, and then there's the ministry's policy. And so I know the intention of the committee, the policy committee, was to try to weave those the way that the ministry policy reads into our policy. So, but I take the point that, yeah, we want to, you know, maybe we want to reference that as a reference, but then use more plain English to explain kind of what that means in practice. So yeah, I think the committee could certainly take back the feedback and take another stab at incorporating it into the policy and then bringing it back. I don't know what the other policy committee members here tonight think, but certainly that's my sense. In terms of timelines, though, I certainly would appreciate some direction from the committee around timelines, and then whether there's any other consultation that the committee would like to see.
Ellen, I do see your hand. I'm just taking a quick look to see if any of the other committee members wanted to speak to Trustee Duncan's comments. And not seeing any. Ellen, please, the floor is yours.
One element that we found extremely helpful in other districts, and Surrey doesn't have a sanctuary school policy, but has changed its registration procedures so that they're as low bar as possible. So if you go on their website for their registration, they clearly list out the minimum required documents that are required. And I think that might be a really good way of just very clearly stating what the minimum required documents are, is if you just simply stay with it. Those are within those areas of what an ordinary resident means and how to establish that.
Thank you very much for that. And good to have references to other policies and practices already in the works elsewhere, or in operation elsewhere. So what is the will of the committee on this one? Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, I'd be willing to bring a motion that the Board of Education of School District number 61 refer the new policy 5150 sanctuary schools back to the policy committee to consider the additional points made tonight. And I think I saw Trustee Duncan taking notes, so she might actually have a list of what those all would be. I'm fingers crossed.
So we have a motion on the floor to refer this back to policy subcommittee to consider content from tonight and feedback received. Any comments? Trustee Kwan?
Sorry, I'm having a second thought here. I'm wondering if we should add a timeline as far as when we would want it back to ops.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Nimi.
Thank you, Chair. I also think maybe a consideration for the committee would be who, if it goes back to subcommittee, who may also be relevant to be in that discussion that would help inform some of these conversations as well. That might be helpful, right? As we look at kind of examining the sensitivity around some of the discussion that was brought up tonight, it might be informants that might help with cultural safety and other areas as well, just as the thought and consideration.
Sorry, are you, just to put a finer point on that, are you suggesting someone from our representative
staff
from rights holders, or?
No, I think there's enough staff that have support that can advise to the committee, right, around what does it look like for being the policy who is being addressed. And I think when we look at what it means to be culturally responsive as an organization, who can help advise on that when you're examining that language. So I think that's the consideration for this committee, to ensure that maybe that's happening at that subcommittee and that the right individuals, or that it's brought forward into there for that healthy and robust conversation, just for your consideration as you navigate and move that forward, that you can ensure that that's happening.
Okay, thank you very much. And I do see that the members of the policy subcommittee are present here and will have their ears on. So I think they'll be in a good position to reach out on that matter. With respect to a specific timeline, that was the last point I heard, with clarification on timelines for review. I see that we now have, first question, Tracy, do you anticipate that VCPAC would want to provide further comments, or is what we've received from South Park, and I'll put that very broadly, anti-racism committee, if I'm getting that right, is reflective of the broad views that VCPAC holds?
I mean, I don't think I can say that because I haven't heard from anyone else,
Really?
sadly. And I can say, generally speaking, as an organization with a human rights lens, that we're likely to be supportive of it, but I just, I'm always reluctant to take that position without, really
Making assumptions.
Yeah.
Fair. So recognizing the time of year that we're dealing with and the challenges of actually getting feedback, what is a reasonable consultation feedback time frame.
For VC PAC.
Yes.
You know, if I can take it to the executive and get them to agree that we'll take on that role of, you know, kind of making a decision on comments, you know, there's broad representation now from different schools. So, you know, I could take it to them, and we are actively meeting in the summer as an executive. So theoretically,
Well,
September is an option. I really, you know, just my personal wish would be this would be in place as soon as it can be, but also being mindful that we want feedback. And I think more than the broad parent voice is, as Dr. Nimi said, that, you know, the lens that's appropriate to the context.
And recognizing that September is likely to be the time of year when this policy is going to be most of use to people. So we don't want to stretch this out unreasonably. Any input from members of the policy subcommittee on what their expectation on being able to turn this around would be? Will the committee be meeting over the summer, for example? Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, so we hadn't scheduled our next meeting, but I think, you know, so I think it would be good to get some direction for the board so that we can organize our work appropriately, and take advantage of whatever availability there is over the summertime to, you know, prioritize this. I think as a committee, we've tried to just prioritize work as directed by the board, and then everything else just sort of falls out from there and will be addressed as and when we've prioritized work from the board. So yeah, I think, I don't know, I can only speak for myself, but I certainly would appreciate getting some direction around timelines so that we can schedule our work appropriately over the summer. So for instance, Chair, if we want to aim to have this turned around so that it can be implemented as quickly as possible in the school year, you know, we would have to have some kind of a special meeting in order to make that happen. Because obviously it would have to be signed off by the board and staff would have to have time to implement it. So given that we're in June and we don't usually meet over the summer, if the board wants to see something different, then we definitely would need some direction.
Superintendent.
Yeah, thank you very much. I am just mindful of our workload leading into the end of June. So I'm managing expectations when I look at our staff here of trying to coordinate a meeting between now and the end of June. So I do think that we have enough information. Thanks very much for Ellen's feedback and South Park. I do think we have information that we can work on this and have it as close to being ready for September, but I'm not optimistic that we'll, well, certainly from my perspective, be able to pull a meeting together between now and the end of June for this specific policy.
Okay. Is there then an appetite? Oh, sorry, Trustee Duncan, please jump in.
No, sorry, I just was going to suggest that that we commit to having this a revised policy back to the committee in September, but maybe we do it through ed policy rather than ops, just appreciating that ed policy falls first in the schedule, and so that would give us an opportunity potentially to to just prioritize this work earlier in September. I don't know if that's helpful operationally or not, or from the perspective of parents or other stakeholders who might want to feed into this. But I think what I'm hearing from the superintendent is that September would be the earliest we could have something back.
So what I'm hearing then is that the motion is that the board will refer this back to the policy subcommittee for consideration at the September Ed Policy and Directions Committee meeting. Superintendent?
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, when I'm speaking with individuals registering and working with our Welcome and Learning Center, we're trying very hard to ensure that all families can register regardless of their citizenship or documentation. So I'm hopeful that this isn't a significant shift from the practice we currently are. I think it's excellent to clarify and to ensure that it's consistent and that all members of the community understand our processes and practices and be more transparent with them. But I do think that I recognize the importance of this being in September and being activated prior to. So I do think we can move through the summer, but I'm hopeful that this isn't a significant shift from what we're currently doing, in that we really do want to ensure all families are able to register.
And thank you for that clarification, Superintendent. It is good to know that and be reminded of the openness that our district has with respect to families and students in this situation. Okay, so the motion is to refer, or that the board refers this to policy subcommittee for review at the September 2023 Education Policy and Directions Committee meeting. Questions, comments? All those in favor? That's unanimous. We will see this again in September. We're now moving on to a new policy, international student enrollment. And who's going to be speaking to this one? You know what happens if I start doing it, so. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So, yeah, we just wanted to bring this draft back to the committee for some feedback and also to get some direction around how the committee would like to see the policy develop further, including the kind of consultation on the draft policy that the committee would like to see undertaken. So I don't know how you want to proceed, Chair, if we want to if there's any immediate feedback from the committee on those areas or not, but we would appreciate some initial thoughts.
Okay, opening up the floor to comments, questions. Dr. Nimi.
Sure, thank you, Chair. I just want to, is there any other comments from committee members before I proceed?
Not so far, but your comments are always welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm bringing forward a concern that I have around this particular draft policy for consideration. I think one of the recommendations that as staff that I would advise to the committee is for us to be able to have this conversation go back to subcommittee as a discussion point, because I believe as we're intending, we want to be able to echo what it looks like for cultural safety and culturally responsive practice in our language. And I am a little concerned with some of the language that's reflected in the policy before it goes out to community for draft. And I think that it would be good for us to be able to have a heartfelt and robust conversation to ensure that it doesn't place or impose misinterpretation of what we're trying to intend or echo forward. So I do believe that we can have those conversations with subcommittee or bring them forward with some with the subcommittee, because we want to make sure that we're echoing what that looks like in a really responsive way. That's my concern.
Recognizing this could be sensitive, could you give me a for instance or a general? I'm not quite sure I'm understanding the.
Sure. I believe that if the committee puts forward a recommendation to have this draft policy go out in its current state, that the public
will have an opportunity to place misunderstanding or othering of potentially sensitive information regarding a particular student population. And I think we need to be really clear as an organization and as governance of the organization of what we're intending. So then that way we don't create an opportunity or a license to other any student within our school district. And I think that's where the cultural safety and the culturally responsive language needs to come into play when we're looking at policies that relate to particular groups or students or families. And so I think that's the opportunity that I'm requesting for a recommendation for a deeper conversation. So then that way we can examine some of those concepts together.
Thank you. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Dr. Nimi for sharing that perspective with us. I certainly would be interested in inviting Dr. Nimi to come visit us on the policy committee and or to share the feedback in writing. Either would be fine, but I think certainly from my perspective, the policy itself reflects policies in other school districts. And I think absolutely the intention is not to other or to, in a disrespectful way, focus on a population, but equally we have an obligation to set policy direction about a particular student population. In this case, we're talking about international students who happen to be fee paying, and so I think be interested to hear your advice about how to speak to that in a policy document. I would also say to my colleagues that if we want to see meaningful change in this area from a systemic perspective and from an equity perspective, then we need to be, I think, realistic about the timelines involved. So if we're going to see any changes implemented by the 2024-25 school year, my understanding from staff is that we would need to see this work through by October, November, in order to see it implemented for the following school year. So I think if we just sort of keep those timelines in mind, and then organize our work accordingly, and then hopefully we'll get to the point where we have a policy, and we do it in a good way.
Dr. Nimi, just confirming, is your hand up for additional comments or yeah?
No, I can provide one additional comment. And so, but thank you for clarifying that too. So I do want to go through to Trustee Duncan. I want to appreciate the feedback and the comment, and I do welcome a conversation just so then that way we can ensure we're anchoring, because I do think for us, what we've been trying to move towards as an organization, especially within the strategic plan, is what does it mean to be culturally responsive? And if we as staff, where I can bring others with me that may be able to help advise on that, that allows us to be able to look at particular populations, ensuring that there's cultural safety with that, that would be the most helpful part, so we can examine that in a really safe way together. So I welcome the conversation, and I appreciate your feedback and the opportunity to present this here tonight as well, just for the consideration.
Trustee Kwan, did I see your hand up?
I just didn't want to interrupt this very valuable and important conversation. So just didn't want to interrupt with questions that still pertain to the policy, but don't pertain to what we're currently talking about. So I want to make sure that that conversation is complete and that there's no one else that needs to contribute.
I think we're in a position, if you have other points to raise, or
okay, great.
Please go forward.
Okay. In that case, I guess my questions were really around, I noticed both 3.3 and 3.5 have highlighting with them. And then in 3.5, I also see an X%, and I just wondered if members of the committee could kind of speak to first the highlighted areas, and second, whether there was any advice on what that X was going to be, or if they wanted direction from this committee or from the board. Just curious about that.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, very astute, Trustee Kwan. The highlighting was left in there deliberately just as really a prompt. So at 3.3, the highlighted section is as described in the supporting regulation. So it was really just as a placeholder to acknowledge that the intention is to have a supporting regulation. And then at 3.5, student enrollment priorities. Again, the intention here is to merely just highlight and make a note, and again as a placeholder to ensure that there is once we've settled on a policy that's supported by the board, that we look and we ensure that there's clarity about student enrollment priorities and how they apply to enrollment decisions. So yeah, that's why those two sections were highlighted. And then in terms of at 3.5, you notice the bracket with X%. So at committee, I had initially just left in the percentage out of the Surrey School District policy. I didn't really want to get us sort of bogged down in a discussion of what percentage, like what the percentage would look like in the context of our school district, because I think there needs to be further discussion, and it might vary from school year to school year, for instance, but there needs to be some more feedback about that. So we settled on just putting X to kind of denote at some point where we need to kind of clarify the direction we want to move in there. But at this point, we're just seeking feedback essentially on where we're at. Yeah, so really the intention, like from my perspective, and I can only speak for myself, I'm not speaking for the committee, but just to ensure that the board gives some direction around this, and we're, you know, in line with the School Act, and which gives the board decision-making, you know, responsibility in this area. And also from my own perspective, I'm hopeful that moving forward, we can address what, in my view, are some systemic inequalities that have developed as a result of some of the financial allocation that follows from this program. So I'm hoping we can get to that point where we have some of those conversations, and where the board can give some direction in line with the School Act, and where we can kind of cross-reference some of the existing board direction around enrollment priorities, and ensure that everyone has a common understanding of how we're moving forward, and how enrollment decisions are going to be made moving forward.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Tracy and then to Trustee Kwan.
Sorry, is it possible I can just follow up?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
I was just curious about the student, or not so much curious. I just wanted to make a comment that I really do appreciate the student enrollment priorities being in there, regardless of how that works out. I know that's one thing that I get a lot of questions on, just from people in general about you know, how that falls in there. So you know, I just think it's great that that's been highlighted, that, you know, we can be more transparent in where it falls and how that works in our district. Thank you.
Thanks. And Tracy, to you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a general ramble, but it just has to come out of my head. I'm just thinking about how, as a parent organization, we don't really have connection to the families of these students because they're in different countries. We don't have connection even to the host families, and I don't know if maybe there's a way that could be supported and connected, at least, because I feel like, you know, there's a real lack of support that we're able to provide to those families and the students by extension. And so it's not I don't even know if it's policy connected, just I really couldn't let the thought go, and I needed to talk about it. And the second piece was, I was thinking about the fee paying students piece, and I know that this is a policy around international students for a specific reason, But when I thought about like cultural safety, being culturally responsive, and, you know, I'm still very much in a learning phase about all of that. But, you know, some of removing that stigma might be an approach of talking about fee-paying students. Just a thought.
No, that is helpful, and I find myself challenged with that too, trying to understand how it applies in this situation, because any student, in my mind, within our district needs to be treated in an equitable and supportive manner, but that it's still appropriate for the board and district to provide direction on how a program that is bringing students into the district is it how it operates and how its implications for students already in the district are taken into consideration. So yeah, it is. I have so much learning to do. So before I start rambling, I see Secretary Treasurer, Dr. Nemi, and Trustee Duncan in that order.
Thank you, Chair. It actually, I'm just going to defer to Dr. Shelley Nemi because my comment kind of takes us away from this conversation. So I'll go to the back of the line.
Certainly.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Pater. Yeah, I think what came up for me, just even when I think of what Tracy was trying to examine, and as we start to learn as a system, what's really also important, and this is where I caution us to not get into othering at times and using the language around cultural safety. The reason is because when we do refer to international students as fee-paying students, and the purchasing of education services, for me, in the lane that I work in is Indigenous education, and local education agreement students are fee-paying students, and they purchase education services off of us. And so this is part of the conversation when we start to examine and other, you know, how we can do that from a lane that best informs us, so we're not putting or bucketing into areas that aren't responsive to that. And so I appreciate, Tracy, you talking about fee-paying students, because there can be a connotation or a stigma or a misconception or an understanding when we use language like that. And so the curiosity goes, how do we bring conscious awareness for us when we're writing policy or advising or teaching, so it doesn't give us a license to have a misunderstanding? And so that, yeah, I think I'll just kind of attach that to Tracy's piece too, because for the lane that I work in is in Indigenous education. And when I look at fee-paying students, I look at the local education agreements that the board has a responsibility to for Indigenous children who are also fee-paying students and purchasing education services. Even though it's not attached to this policy, those are the considerations that we can't separate when it comes to being culturally responsive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Comfortably for me, I've always been comfortable with the idea that this district operates on the traditional territories of Indigenous students. It's so they were here first. Yeah. Trustee Duncan, did you have observation?
I did. Well, I just wanted to link back to conversation just around transparency and oversight, and just highlight at 3.8. So what the policy envisions that the operations of the program will be reviewed annually by the superintendent, who will ensure that an annual report is submitted to the Board of Education. So there's sort of a procedural link back to increased transparency and oversight. And I, you know, I would hope that what that looks like is both, you know, financial and governance level reporting, but also an opportunity to kind of look at the program through the lens of the experience or the recipient of the service, which in this case is international students. So yeah, so I see this as a very sort of healthy way to move forward when we're being clear about what our intention is, how we're going to govern this, how enrollment decisions are going to be made, how we're going to treat people. I think that's only good. It's only a positive. So I think it's just how we get there. And of course, we all want to get there in a good way. And I also want to just sort of say that I think it's only right and natural that we as a local Board of Education operating in British Columbia are going to hold up both the rights of our local students and rights holders like Indigenous students who hold a very special honored place where we are on the traditional territories of both the Songhees and Esquimalt nations, and also our other local students. These are the folks that we have a primary responsibility to as a Board of Education. And so I think it really is so important that when we're engaged in other activities beyond our mandate, that we do so in a very considered, very transparent way. And so hopefully, my intention in bringing this forward was just so that we articulate openly, transparently how we do this work. So it would be really appreciate, in light of the need for consultation, to get some direction about what that might look like and when that could feasibly occur. And again, keeping in mind the timelines that we're working to if we want to implement change in the 2024-25 school year. I don't know if I can bother the committee for some direction, but that would be helpful.
To put a finer point on it, what specific direction would you be hoping to come away from this meeting with?
Well, from my own perspective, I would really like to look at next steps. So I think, Dr. Nimi has kindly offered to kind of meet with the committee to discuss the policy in terms of the language. And then from there, do we want to be sending, what's the best way to consult? Is the best way to consult to send it out by email and give folks an opportunity to respond in writing? And is the best approach to, I don't know, have a public information session? I mean, there's a lot of different ways to consult. So I'm looking for some feedback about how consultation could look.
Okay, thank you. I see the superintendent, then secretary treasurer, then trustee Kwan.
Thank you. Just want to follow up with the consultation and having Dr. Nimi. We also have Director Davis, who also should attend or could hopefully attend a meeting to discuss this. This is his area of expertise and would greatly benefit from hearing his perspective on it. And I do want to point out that he has presented on an annual basis. He did not present this year in a specific ISP presentation, but he has every December presented. So I think if the board would like something specific presented in that time frame, it would be great to hear so that he knows what he's lining up his presentation to look like. But I do want to suggest that he has presented annually, and I wouldn't want for it to be that the work that he does is less than transparent.
And I don't think there was any such suggestion, but I do appreciate the idea that if we do want to hear from Director Davis, that we will do so, or we will put out an invitation with advance notice so that he can prepare. Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I don't want to take away from the conversation that we're having around cultural responsiveness, but there's always a financial piece to these discussions as well. And I just, if the policy and the enrollment, international student enrollment policy does change enrollment based on the feedback from international program, there could be a significant financial impact on the district. So we also need time to be able to explore what that would look like, and just be mindful that there could be a financial impact in making some of these changes.
Absolutely. Trustee Kwan and then Dr. Nimi.
I simply had a comment around consultation, and I know for the last policy that we recently discussed with the sanctuary schools, and referring that back to policy subcommittee. I believe Dr. Nimi had perhaps suggested that she would be willing to consult on that as well, and being culturally responsive with that policy. Correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm putting words in your mouth, but and I wonder if it might make an opportunity if the policy subcommittee was able to do both in one meeting and have discussions around cultural responsiveness with both. That might be something that get them both in the same meeting.
Dr. Nimi?
Excellent. Thank you very much. I do think it's something that definitely can be, I'm happy to support. And I just do want to echo kind of back to the superintendent. And the reason is that international education and Indigenous education really do focus our work, even though we're very different in the work that we do. It's the work around, looking at culturally responsive practice, cultural safety, and the different impacts that families have when we're servicing them, need they be coming, relocation, dislocation, the system in itself in general. So I fully think that Director Jeff Davis should be in the conversation. This is his lane of expertise. And I think the two of us can definitely complement and support the work of the subcommittee, and then advise if we think that there's other people that, may be able to also help, because I think we want this done in a really robust and healthy and safe way to uphold what we're standing for, right? And I think that that's the work that we've been trying to do. So I appreciate this healthy conversation tonight, because I think it hopefully can anchor us in the direction that we're going. So thank you, Trustee Kwan, as well. Appreciate that.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we have some ideas for how we'll start prioritizing the work. I just wanted to briefly just in terms of ISP revenues and expenses on the financial side, thank you to the Secretary Treasurer for raising that. I think that's a piece that will be very helpful to have in terms of, we have basic revenue and expenses information as part of the existing reporting. I think my sense is that school-based allocations and broken down at that level will be helpful. We can start to kind of see from a financial perspective allocations of resources, where they're going and how they're being allocated. So yeah, it'd be great to get some information around school-based allocations of ISP revenues and how that works to feed into this policymaking process.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. And I actually think that point raises the opportunity for the audit committee to perhaps have a look at the financial practices and policies related to the international student program. So Trustee Kwan, perhaps you and I should get together and look at just reviewing that program more generally, and to better understand and be able to provide some sort of complementary reporting to the policy subcommittee, rather than have to add that financial element to what is already clearly a pretty substantial workload for the policy subcommittee. Trustee Duncan, if I could, the element 3.5 is one that feels like a lot of the substance of what is being presented in this draft policy is really all tied up in this one particular element. my first question is, would you foresee any changes to existing student or enrollment priorities in this term? Or any clarification within the priorities as they currently exist, or is it just a matter of consciously applying our existing enrollment priorities to the international student program?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both thing. It's a great question. I think what surfaced recently was a different kind of like parallel process going on when it comes to ISP enrollment as opposed to local student enrollment priorities. And so the and where the board was not giving direction around how ISP students are being prioritized in our district as opposed to local students. So where, you know, local students, it's very clear what the board's direction is under the School Act. It's set out in the student enrollment priorities, which is transparent and on the website as is required by the School Act. But what surfaced recently is that in the case of ISP students, they're being prioritized as though they were in catchment students, so the highest priority in terms of enrollment. And then it also kind of surfaced just some of the strain on the on space. So you know, we've got schools that are over enrolled, they're beyond capacity. We've got it started to surface other things, you know, just other feedback in the community that I was getting around equity and you know, which schools benefit and how schools benefit from the revenue from the program. And so it just started to become very clear to me that as a system, we want to have common understanding both of what the role of the board is in setting direction, and as well as really unpack, you know, if there are systemic inequities going on, then we need to kind of be brave and have those difficult conversations and address them. And I think it's just about like how we get there. I'm not making any kind of judgment, prejudging what that looks like in terms of enrollment moving forward. Maybe it looks like the exact same number of students, but just maybe the allocations to different schools looks different. Maybe it's those allocations are shared out more equally across our district. I don't know. But my hope is that we have the conversations and we're all have a common understanding of what our goal and intentions are, and that where appropriate, that is directed by the board. And that is what is required by the School Act. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question or if I'm just rambling because it's getting late.
It certainly speaks to the question. I guess for me, when I was reviewing the policy, I found myself trying to understand what the implications of this policy would be. And so without sort of fully appreciating where the tie-ins were with enrollment priorities, et cetera, it was hard for me to really get a handle on what we were seeking to do beyond making this concrete and transparent. If there was anything beyond just clearly articulating what our goals and expectations were around enrollment of international students in schools.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, when it became clear that there was the highest priority was being given to ISP students, and they were being treated as in-catchment students, which is the highest priority in terms of the board's student enrollment priorities. It became clear to me that there was some kind of, you know, there was a need for the board to weigh in, because this is the board's area of responsibility, determining student enrollment priorities. And so, and I think some folks were maybe under the mistaken impression that that ISP's students fall within the out of district enrollment priority, which is last on the list of enrollment priorities. But that's not the case. And so yeah, so I think if there's a need for clarity, there's a need for the board to give some direction, and yeah, and just to move forward with everyone having a common understanding of what we're trying to achieve and how the rules are being applied.
That looks legit. So my understanding at this point in time, in terms of direction moving forward, is that we are interested in sort of identifying next steps and also a timeline. I heard very clearly from you that to be able to make practical decisions on this, that we need to basically come to some sort of determination by October, which suggests understanding from the superintendent the challenges of trying to get a meeting together by the end of June. Are we looking at this work moving forward, at least some aspects of this work over the summer months, with sort of direction back to either committee or board in September? I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but that's kind of what I'm looking at. Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, I think I can certainly work, like as chair of the policy committee, I can certainly work with the secretary treasurer and with the superintendent to sort of see what's possible in terms of scheduling, and to try to prioritize inviting Dr. Nimi and the director of the ISP, Director Davis to the committee, and then with the goal of coming back in September. So with some further feedback and maybe a revised draft in light of those discussions. I don't know if that's reasonable. Superintendent and secretary treasurer might have some views about that.
Yeah, I think that is reasonable. I think that would be our goal as well, is to have something before the end of September, which would be backing this up into early September or late August to get to.
Okay, so with respect to the presented motion, it feels like we've talked it through. Do we need to put a bow on it with a formal vote that the Board of Education School District number 61, Greater Victoria, review the draft policy, international education enrollment, and provide direction to the policy subcommittee on consultation and further development in compliance with bylaw 9210, the development of policy. Now it's seeking clarification. I believe that we've worked out a bit of a work plan as far as next steps are concerned. Are we seeking further direction beyond that? Trustee Duncan?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for the committee, if the committee wants a revised policy back in September. I think it would be good to direct that so that we're 100% clear on what the expectation is, and as in terms of the timeline.
And further,
my suggestion would be maybe we start fresh, with just a motion to refer it back to policy committee for further development, to be brought back to, and again, I think it probably makes sense to come through at policy in September.
so that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, refer the draft policy, international education and enrollment, to the policy subcommittee for further development and consultation, to be referred to education policy and directions at the September 2023 meeting. Have I got it? Any comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is unanimous. We're moving on now to personnel items. D1, staffing report. Director of Human Resource Services, Ver.
Thank you, Chair Painter. My report is very brief tonight. The trustees requested that we update them on a regular basis with respect to EA educational assistant staffing. So I indicated we'd come back to you every other month and with an update. The first update was back in April, so we now have the second update. From a good news perspective, the numbers in terms of the average fail to fills is declining. It was, as you'll see in the final attachment to the report, the final chart that gives you a monthly average. It was sitting at low 70s, 60s, high 60s for most of the last several months. Starting in April, we've dropped that down, and it continues to drop down in May and June to about 50 or high 40s. So that's the good news portion of the story. I think the bad news portion of the story is we've enacted a number of measures that have brought that number down, but that number is still significant. Not for discussion tonight, especially given your agenda, but at some point in time, what I will tell the board, and it won't be myself that engages in that conversation, but the board and the stakeholders have to come to the realization that in the current economic market, in the current labor market, if we continue to demand that even our daily absences, when everyone on the list has been exhausted, have to be filled by qualified staff, fully qualified staff, in other words, staff that have the academic credentials and the experience and or through that have an education through the bridge program. If that's our requirement as a board, we will never solve the fail to fill problem in the foreseeable future. And I present that simply as my observation of the reality of the situation the board finds itself in. You can't say we need fully qualified EAs even to fill in when we don't have them on a day-by-day absence and expect that we're going to have no fail to fills. Those two concepts, unfortunately, are diametrically opposed. We have implemented everything we talked about in the March report, short of having some permanent EAs, but even that's not going to help. We've had 30 to 40 to 70 absences almost every day since the middle of September. So anyway, EAs that get on the supply list are going to be able to work every day, regardless of whether we make them permanent or not. So that's not going to help. I think the reality is the board is going to have to wrestle with the concept of having fully qualified for every absence versus having failed to fills, because those two concepts aren't going to be diametrically opposed. But at the current time, we're reducing down those absences. But when you're still sitting at 45 to 50 as your average absence, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. I would encourage the board to consider those tough decisions as they move forward, or we'll be having, others will be having the same conversation a year from now and 2 years from now and beyond. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, and Director, thank you very much for that. It's a challenging situation, and the idea that we are at a position where we're considering reducing the qualifications to work with some of our students with the most complex needs. It's a very troubling outlook, but I do recognize the practical aspects of what you're suggesting. I'm going to start with Tracy and Jane, and then on to Trustee Duncan.
I think I'd actually like to hear from Jane first.
Oh, okay. We'll start with Jane and go on to Tracy.
I'm just going to have to jump in there and say that I suggest to you all that we are staffing our EAs with unqualified people as it is. Doing that bridge program does not in any way make a person fully qualified. Some of those people are coming from absolutely different industries that are getting the 3 weeks. And at the bare minimum, anybody that comes on board with without the qualifications needs at least that to get a little taste of something, because I talk to people quite often in schools and they are not qualified. They tell me they aren't comfortable with what they're doing. They want to, they don't want to work with the kind of students they're working with. And we are in a critical time. Absolutely. But the very least they need is something like that to give them something to work with our students. So I just want to point that out, that, those people are not fully qualified. They're doing their best, but we're also putting huge load on our qualified EAs that have the experience, because not only are they working every day with these children doing the best they can, they're helping our underqualified EAs do the best job that they can too. So it's a very difficult situation for everybody out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy.
That's why I wanted to hear from Jane, because I knew that she would say one of the things that I was going to say. And I really do appreciate what you're saying, Director Vare. It's not that I don't see where you're coming from. And, you know, trust, I'm wearing both my hats at the moment as VCPAC chair and also as executive director of VC Ed Access, that I see this in a more significant way than just in this district. So I really do, I recognize what you're saying. But what Jane is saying is so important. And I will expand on that to say that in my conversations with WorkSafe around the province, in my conversations with other districts, staff, administrators, students, and parents, it does more harm to bring in people who do not have adequate qualifications, and actually is quite often the underlying reason behind some of those violent incidents, which is one of the things that I believe we're trying to address. So I would invite you to kind of examine that more deeply, because if you look at the root of some of those incidents that have been reported, I think you might find a connection there. So I just really caution that idea that you need to bring in people in that position. I do have more to say, but I know it's 10 o'clock and it was a short report. I kind of want to do a whole, I think I'll come and do a presentation as VC Ed Access on this, just to give you some context. But I did want to ask you a question, actually, Director Vare, just that number, and I think you answered it before and I cannot remember. Is that an FTE number? Oh, sir, you're muted.
Director Vare, you're muted at this point. We'd all
Sorry,
like to hear
that's a number of positions, not an FTE. It's
right.
just counting
So,
number of positions.
again, not necessarily directing the board, but it might be a good idea to get the number of hours that you're missing as well.
We don't track that, and that would be an onerous burden on my staff that they can't fulfill.
Totally hear it. I appreciate that. It's just, it's so different when you talk about a failure to fill of someone who's working a 5-hour day and someone who's working, for 2 hours as, a second job. So that's something to think about. And, the translation to, I guess it was the money translation that I was interested in, is how much isn't getting spent that maybe you could look at different options for. But anyway, that's all I wanted to say at this point. And oh no, one other thing is just another data point for the board that they might want to look at in relation to this same issue, is how many days specialist teachers were pulled to cover regular classes, because this also has a significant impact on the support of disabled students, and again, on those critical incidents that can arise.
Thank you very much, Tracy. On to Trustee Duncan and then Cindy.
Yeah, I will keep my comments brief, but I just want to say, thank you to everybody. And I appreciate how difficult it must be for Director Vare, you and staff and HR that are scrambling, trying to help support schools to identify staff. My sense from everything that I've heard is that there are underlying health and safety issues here with having unqualified or folks that don't have the skills and experience in order to address some of the complex needs of some students. You hear, we hear as trustees about the struggles on the stress and the strain on the entire school team that has to come in and support in the absence of a skilled EA. And I think this is a provincial issue. I'd like to see the province take steps to really support the adoption of standards of practice for EAs. We recently wrote to the province asking for them to prioritize that work that's been ongoing for many, many years, and to, hire folks permanently, address the pay issue so that it becomes, you know, a realistic and properly respected profession in and of itself. Yeah. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more analysis about some of the incidents from a health and safety perspective, and would be interested to know if WorkSafe has provided us with any direction or guidance on how we might support EAs in those situations.
Thank you very much. Cindy.
This is a really complicated issue, and we always talk about it at DOSH. We've talked about it a lot here in ed policy, and I know that HR has worked really hard on this issue and have tried about everything to try to resolve this issue. And so I appreciate the work and really, frankly, the creativity you've tried to put in some of these solutions. So thank you for that. For your team in HR. As seeing some of the information that comes through DOSH, it's regarding student to worker violence. It's pretty clear that this is quite the complicated issue, and it's a little bit cyclical in that students are lashing out because of a lack of service that they are entitled to, but then the workers, if they're not trained properly, then they'll lash out more. And so it is a bit of a health and safety issue, but I just wanted to support what Jane was saying, in that I feel that it is quite important to have trained professionals in those roles, but I also want to acknowledge that yes, there is a provincial issue and a shortage, and this is a hard subject to find a solution on. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Thank you very much for that. Other questions, comments? And yeah, I would like to take the opportunity to just reiterate the recognition of what a difficult situation this is right across the board. It impacts our students, it impacts our staff, impacts the families supporting both. And staff, it's not just in the classroom, it's, you know, we've seen in multiple reports the efforts that have been made to address this. We're not there, and I would echo Trustee Duncan's comments that I'm not entirely sure that the solutions are to be found within the district or at the district level, and that you know, while I will continue to encourage and support the creative efforts to address this problem to the best of our abilities, until such time as the province chooses to prioritize the needs of these students, I think we're going to continue to see these same challenges. Director Bear, one question I had, and this does follow on the observation from Tracy. Well, admittedly, I was going to ask anyway. Just for clarification on the teacher side, is this the teacher absences? Does that include situations where someone other than the designated classroom teacher was brought in to fill a role, or is it only where there was a failure to fill entirely that shows up on the list? Because as Tracy mentioned, the implications of drawing on our specialty teachers has implications for the quality of service to all the students in the classroom, and just something I'm really interested in following.
Yes, Chair Painter. The way we calculate it is we count it as a fail to fill when there is no replacement teacher brought in. So that would count as a fail to fill, and then at that point, the school redeploys staff within the building or looks at other methods. I can tell you, we do not have a teacher shortage problem at this board. We are one of the few boards in the province that have that. So when you look at those numbers, and there's some significant EA numbers, but they call them the teachers' numbers, there are only 2 months where we actually had an average, a high average above 1 for the month with teacher fail to fills. So that doesn't mean we're redeploying staff on a regular basis within those schools, only in those 2 months. And the odd day in those other months would we be redeploying staff within our school. So we have a significant EA fail to fill. This board, unlike most boards in the province, does not have a teacher shortage and does not have a teacher fail to fill problem, other than a couple of months and the odd day in those other months. But those other months are blank because on average, we've had less than 1 fail to fill per day in every month, but those 2. So we haven't been redeploying teachers significantly to deal with that, because we actually don't have a fail to fill problem in our teacher ranks. I mean, that's good news. It doesn't alleviate obviously the problems we have with our EAs.
No, but it is good news. So let's take it where we can get it. Thank you very much for the helpful clarification. It's very much appreciated. Last chance for questions, comments. Thank you, Director Ver. And since this is my opportunity to go on at length, really wanted to extend my thanks to you for your contributions to the district, and wish you well in future endeavors.
Thank you.
We're moving on to finance and legal affairs with E1 monthly financial report. Secretary Treasurer, or will it be your associate?
Will be me, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. So in the agenda package on page 50, you'll find the monthly financial report for May 2023 and May 2022. The May 2022 report was the report that was included in the June ops agenda package. And the May 2023 numbers reflect the data after the May month end has been run, so as current as possible. The budget in this document is the final budget plus any changes after that. And the actuals are reflective of activity from July 1st to May 31st. So if we take a look at the total revenue, so this is, we're looking at the amount of revenue budgeted that has not yet been received. The current year total is 8%, and compared to the prior year at 9%, so very close. And if we look at total expenses, so looking at the amount of expense budget available to spend at May 31st, the current year is at 12%, and the prior year is at 13%. I'm not sure if you recall, but last month I made a comment about the 2 months actually not being totally comparable. The reason being that last year we budgeted for our contingency in Object 519. And so there was just under $2 million in there. So if I do the same adjustment as we did last month, there would be 897,000 more available to spend in the current year than there was in the prior year. That doesn't necessarily mean that that is the surplus that we have available at the end of the year, but it certainly is moving in the right direction. If you recall, in April, that number was 317,000. So the rest is for your information, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Tracy.
I'm so sorry. I know it's after 10. I'm trying not to ask questions. I just wanted to ask, because I know that the contract increase was noted in LIF, the CF, and the Community Link funding. I don't know if we've even gotten there yet. I just made a note about it earlier. And I guess that the allocation for students with designations doesn't come into effect until next year with the grant, right? The increase. Just wanted to confirm because I wasn't sure if it was tied in as well with that contract increase.
If you're referring to the revenue that we received from the Ministry for Labor Settlement.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Just so I have the right language.
Yeah. We would have received labor settlement funding in the current year separately, and then it gets rolled into the per pupil funding in the following year.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And it just goes in those three funds, and there wasn't any increase to the grant for students with special needs until the 2023-24 year, correct?
You're speaking to the special purpose funds?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think there is a separate, Julie might want to jump in, but I think she does a separate adjustment for those funds to reflect the labor settlement. Whereas in the operating, we wouldn't break it out in that much detail.
Okay, yeah, I was curious about it just because I know it was fairly significant and whether it would be of any use at this point in the year.
Sorry, my camera's off because I was having internet issues. Are you referring to the increase in LIFT funding that was then rolled into the inclusive learning funding for EA supports?
Yeah, well, there's the LIFT funding, but then there was also an increase to the grants for designations, but I wasn't sure if there was some in the current year or if it's only
all of the grant
coming year.
All the labor settlement funding is used to cover the increase in wages and benefits. So it kind of offsets the expenses go up because the individuals get salary increases, and then we get the labor settlement funding, which then is used to cover the increases.
I'm going to send you an email so that we don't have to, I know what I think I'm asking it badly. Let me just send an email. It's really simple.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'll throw myself on the list. Secretary Jerry, I was hoping you could talk me down off the ledge. When I look at on page 51, line 8, employee future benefits expense, and I see that big red number in brackets. Could you just explain, are these funds that are part of the labor settlement, or are these somehow a liability for us, showing the 190,588 in red?
Yes, they're not related to labor settlement funds at all. So this is a liability that we set up, and we make an estimate for the change in that liability. So it will include things like if there's any vested sick leave that is required to be paid out to individuals. I believe we may include vacation in there. There's a list of items which I have somewhere here, but essentially it's not tied to wages and benefits. And what happens is that we get financial statements from our benefits providers at the end of the year, and we'll make an adjustment to that amount at that time. So what happens throughout the year is that certain times of the years, they use a lot of vacation. So you'll see a fluctuation up and down throughout the year with a final adjustment at year end.
Okay. And I guess the one part that threw me is that when I see the 145% at next to it, when I know that you and your team are always so effective at keeping that down to single digit increments. It was the variation that had me wondering. So thank you. One other question I had was on page, I guess 52, the subsequent page, and it's line 514 about janitorial supplies. And here we're seeing a fairly significant shift away from what the budget expectations were. I did speak with our director of facilities once before about this, and was wondering if we have any clarity on why the numbers are out of alignment with what our expectations were.
I can jump in with sort of a
Okay.
general explanation, but then if Marnie or Julie has a more specific explanation, they can add to it. Often what will happen in facilities is that we'll establish a budget, often based on prior years or an average of prior years. And what we've seen in the current year is an increase in janitorial supplies, an inflationary increase quite a bit. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that the janitorial department will be over budget overall, or facilities will be over budget overall, but certainly that line item was not sufficient to cover the costs. Hopefully that there are other line items within that department that are in a surplus balance that would offset that, particularly in facility services overall. That's generally the case. And I see Julie has her hand up, so she may have even more to add to that.
Thank you.
We had reached out to Mark Baggett, the manager of building operations, about this. And he was explaining the increase, and he said, we've been unable to, global supply chain factors having at Janesville Industries. We've seen this adversely affect the unit price for cleaners, soaps, paper products. Consumption of hand and paper towels has increased since the onset of the pandemic. And then let's see if there's anything else. So they have taken some steps to try to reduce the costs, changing paper towels, etc. But yeah, it's just unfortunately it's a true cost increase.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. No, it wasn't meant as criticism at all. It was just, again, when everyone is so effective at really accurate budgeting, when I see numbers like that out of alignment, it makes me curious. But thank you very much. I appreciate that. Seeing no other hands, let's move on to the budget change report.
Thank you, Chair. I can move forward with that one. So the budget change report is in the agenda package on page 53. This report highlights all revenue changes and larger expense changes to the budget. So there have been a few changes in operating since the April report. So in the changes amended budget section, the new items that have been added since April include an adjustment to the February 1701 funding for what the ministry refers to as special needs. And so we've received an additional 11,000. We also have received 31,000 in miscellaneous donations and revenue. So that would include things like dry grad and a monk rebate, Cooper Smith, and contributions for the Indigenous grad. And cafeteria revenue is up by 18,000 and theater rental revenue by 2,000. If we look at the special purpose fund, there's been two changes there. So under the annual facility grant, interest revenue is at 19,000, which is up 1,000 from last month. School generated funds, interest revenue is at 165,000. This has actually gone down by 17, but Julie has explained it was adjusted to match the actuals. And under capital, there's one change, also interest revenue for local capital, now at 55,000. So an increase of 2,000 from April. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you to the Secretary Treasurer for the report. I just wanted to clarify timelines. Of course, everybody, we're all keen to find out where we've ended up at the end of the financial year in terms of the outcome of our spending freeze and how much money that has generated. So I wonder, just in terms of timelines, when you expect that we'll have that information available to the board.
We won't actually know exactly where we're at until the end of June. We have a very tight turnaround for our year end. And so Julie and team have auditors who will be on site. I believe it's July 17th. So 3-week turnaround on our financial statements. So we generally have, we do that work first to make sure that we have all of our entries in, and then we start to look at the carry forwards and surpluses to see. So I think in July, and Julie can correct me if I'm wrong, but we would have it takes a little bit of time to go through everything, but we would have a sense of kind of our overall surplus. And then we would need to look at the breakdown of that. So looking at the schools, because we adjusted the total reserves, doing separate adjustments for each of the schools for that. We usually, when schools ask, we usually say September, but if the board is looking for feedback on that specifically, I'm sure we could get that to you prior to September.
Thank you very much. Wish you well. It's going to be an intense period of time, but thank you for the good work.
Okay, seeing no further hands, thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer and Associate Secretary Treasurer. And we're on to E3, 2024-2025 Annual 5-Year Capital Plan. The first motion to be discussed is that the Board of Education School District 61 approve for submission to the Ministry of Education and Childcare the 2024-2025 capital plan as it relates to major capital programs. And will our Director of Facilities be taking this one, or someone else?
Yeah, I can definitely answer any questions if you have them. Nothing has changed since last month on the major capital plan.
Okay. I apologize for not noticing it before, but notice that there's a reference to Burnside Community School as opposed to SJ Burnside. Is that name not formally within our records now, or?
Yeah, that's just the name that is in our MyCap submission. So it takes a little bit to get it changed. So when you run the report, it just runs it that way. So it'll probably be changed sometime around September or October.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Trustee Duncan.
Had a quick question around the major capital documents. Wanted to see if we had any update around SJ Burnside and what exactly is going on there structurally, what it is that we're applying to do. I noticed that it says structural work. I'm just wondering if we get some further context.
Yeah, it's much like Oakland's. We tried to install the shoring. We ran into some abatement problems. So we've got the abatement companies coming in July. So they'll be there all of July, and then we'll install the shoring in August. And then they'll do a full report. The feeling is the full report will be very similar to what's in Oakland's. So we're working with the same engineer on both sites to come up with a plan in order to address the issues.
Are the schools a similar vintage? Just out of curiosity, or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Trustee Duncan, you had a follow-up?
No, I just very briefly, I wondered whether or not the structural issues linked to any of the work that's been undertaken over the years there, in terms of seismic upgrades and so on, or if it's completely separate.
It's completely separate, yeah.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Okay, seeing no further questions, we have the motion before us. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. We're going to move on to the minor capital program, the motion before us is that the Board of Education, School District 61, Greater Victoria, approve for submission to the Ministry of Education and Childcare the 2024-2025 capital plan as it relates to minor capital programs.
May I clarify, there's 2 changes in this one from last month. There was a reduction in South Park SEP roof replacement from $1 million down to 500,000. The reason being is we spoke to the ministry and we're trying to spend the money in that fiscal year. So we'll do South Park instead of a 2-phase plan into a 3-phase plan. And then the food program was about 20,000 and it's around 307,000, so quite a big jump. This incorporates any necessary kitchen needs, any sinks, any fridges, some industrial toasters, anything like that that we need for the food program.
Trustee Duncan.
Just a couple of quick questions. One, just around the HVAC applications, the CNCP applications. Just wanted to confirm that we are moving towards electrifying our systems there. Yeah, so that was the first question.
In the case of the ones that we've submitted recently, they are gas submissions that are going to be more energy efficient, so they will bring down our greenhouse gas emissions. If we want to go to complete electric, we are going to incur more costs, and we're at a bit of a critical stage in some of our schools that we actually need heat. So we need to kind of replace the natural gas boilers as a backup system, and then look at doing a primary electrification after that. That made any sense?
Yeah,
I think so. With my very limited knowledge of this area, I will trust that there's a plan in place. So thank you for that. There's a plan. We're moving in the right direction, I'm hearing. And then the only other question I had was actually through the chair, I think more to the superintendent, and this is just linking back to the plan, the minor capital plan around foods and food infrastructure spending. I'm wondering when we're going to see a plan around how we're going to spend that or allocate, or what the plan is around food programs moving forward, in light of the ministry's new funding. I just sort of like want to come full circle where we're looking at what investments we're asking of the ministry, and then we're also linking back that to the plan that we have for this next school year.
Through the chair, yeah, we're currently working with the newly assigned VP food coordinator as well. And we have done a basic survey of the district to see where we're at in terms of being able to store food and serve food. And the minor capital will address those schools that don't have a fridge or don't have a sink, and we'll create those spaces. So we're through that process currently. We're now also looking at what will be available first up in September in terms of food availability to all 48 schools within our district. All 48 schools will have something up and going, and we will have a 3-staged rollout, 2 or 3-staged rollout over the course of the year, so that we're actually planning ahead. It was mentioned about industrial toasters, for example, and do those industrial toasters have a plug-in that we can plug them in? But certainly knowing that if we're a breakfast program, having a toaster that properly can produce enough toast, for example, would be important, and getting kids through to receive that food. So over the course of next year, we'll have the full plan laid out. We'll have a summary of the plan by the end of June. We are currently working, like I said, on what has to be in place by the end of June, and what do we know will be in place for September when it starts up. So in a long way, it's a rollout plan that we will again develop a sustainable food program throughout the district and the 48 schools. And I hope that answered. I'm really tired, so I have no idea what I said.
No, thank you. I'm looking forward to the plan. I guess that's what I'll take away. Thank you for the work, and I'm looking forward to the plan.
Thanks. I'll throw in my 2 bits, then I'll make it quick, Deputy Superintendent. Will the food plan, will it reflect the support that we receive from community organizations that are really playing a key role in delivering some of the food programs to our different schools?
Through the chair, yes. One of the things we do know with our community partners is they have limited ability to serve all of the district. So what we're looking at are pretty much zones. What zones can a particular community organization support with us, and how do we continue to build those relationships that are sustainable? We know that there's a lot of community support that really wants to do well, but they don't have the capacity to do what we need. So we have to phase it in, and we have to really look at again, regionalized support, where we know Rainbow Kitchens on this side of town, for example, Mustard Seeds on this side of town. So how do we combine them so that we're all successful in the framework? So yes, we are considering that.
Thank you very much. Anything further? Seeing no hands. Motion before us on minor capital programs. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much, Director of Facilities. Oh, man, you're not off the hook yet. Operations update for June 2023.
I'll try and be brief. Summer planning is definitely in process and almost complete. We've got the metal shops. The equipment is about 95% moved around and connected with the safety lines and the signage going up this summer. We've got the HRVs have finally arrived, so we're going to be installing them over the next couple months. We're starting to we're going to start planning, or we've planned the exterior siding of the Strawberryville Elementary. That's going to take probably 2 to 3 summers, depending on what we find when we open it up. The chimney replacement at South Park schedule, number of asphalt repairs throughout the district, number of roof replacements, number of elevator and lift upgrades. We've got 5 childcare sites in various stages, and they're progressing well. The Vic West portable classrooms complete. We're just working with the City of Victoria to get the occupancy now. Telecom, we received the building permit for Telecom, so that's exciting. We've got the site prep planned, the mover planned, so they're going to be moving it in July. So we still have a backup plan for the students in September if we don't get all the schedules off and occupancy by September, so that's good. The custodians, we continue to hire custodians for the upcoming school year and the summer work. July 5th and 6th is going to be a district-wide training session for custodians. It's new to facilities, and it's a great opportunity for the custodians to engage with one another. PAN-CIS team, they recently updated the security system at James Bay, and then we're a little bit blindsided when Colquitt's security system failed. So the electricians at NCIS managed to pull out all stops, and they got the fire protection completed in a day. We still have the security system should be up and running by the end of the week. So we do have patrols arranging on nights and the weekends. So that's good. Our cartage team is busy moving theater productions and chairs and getting ready for principal and teacher moves this summer. Transportation, they're busy routing all the inclusive students. There's about 16 third wave runs planned for next year so far. We still plan the 4 current regular busing runs for next year. They're also busy with all the internal field trips. We're fully booked this month, it's crazy. And we're also in the process of ensuring all our white fleet and all the school buses that are owned by the various secondary schools. Climate and Brian, our energy manager. Weather permitting, we're lucky. The boilers got shut down a little bit earlier this year, so we're going to see a good reduction on our greenhouse gas emissions. And with quick calculations, we saved about $50,000 by shutting them down early, so that was nice. The Climate Action Accountability Report and the GHG emission report is complete and submitted to the province. Brian's audited all the district water meters and is busy auditing the electrical meters. So he found a number of water meters and has talked to the utility companies about getting reductions. So that's nice. And he's starting his climate action poster on exterior doors, and that will save some greenhouse gas emissions. And he is also working on educational awareness around paper procurement. So that's that for today.
Thank you. Window of opportunities closed. On to Victoria High School seismic project update.
Really small update. So monthly communications continue to go out to the community. The Grant and Gladstone Road upgrades are now complete. They're currently working on the plantings and the irrigation installation around there. The turf field is substantially complete now. There's still lots to do, but we're moving in the right direction. The science room furniture and millwork is being installed. The rooms look lovely. The exterior window and brick terracotta replacements are almost complete, and we're going to see the scaffolding start to be removed. Drywall, paint, mechanical, electrical still all underway, as is flooring and millwork. It's a busy place. The paint in the auditorium is all the painting in the auditorium is stopped. It's been years of water penetration into some of the bricks, so we have to dry it out and get humidifiers in there. So that won't stop the occupancy though in January if we can't get it painted in time. Heritage corridor ceilings are progressing well, and the carving on the learning common doors is underway. And work is starting on the Fernwood Plaza, and the remaining parking lots will be completed over the summer months in August. The parking lot in front of Ferry Tech will be paved. So it's getting there. Are there any questions?
I'm seeing no hands. With that, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Have a lovely late evening.
I will, you too.
Okay, we have no public disclosure of in-camera items. I have no notices of new business, but show of hands, anyone who has some? I'm seeing none. Notice of motions? None. No general announcements. I'm seeking a motion to adjourn. From Trustee Gagnon. Any debate? Just checking. Thank you very much for a very full agenda. And those of you I won't see later in June, I hope you have a lovely summer. Do take care. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor? And big surprise, it's unanimous. Have a good night, everyone.